Hello, my friend, and welcome to the 176th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And if you've never heard this before, this is a podcast hosted by a girl who simply wants to know what Congress is doing with my tax money and in my name, and I'm doing my learning out loud. And sometimes when I do this, I make mistakes. And I made what I considered to be a mistake in the last episode, and I would like to correct that. The last episode, number 175, was about the State Department. And I had never really looked into the State Department before because why would I? It's the State Department. It's our diplomacy wing. It's full of nerds that do the talking and they create the peace. What's to see there? Well, it turns out there's a shitload to see there. And to summarize what I discovered, it really boils down to the State Department, along with all of its do-gooder work, which is real and important and it's stuff to be proud of. But along with that work, it's also using our tax money to orchestrate the overthrow of governments by straight up buying weapons for people willing to fight governments, but also in sneakier ways, like funneling our tax money to private organizations, some literally controlled by the Republican and Democratic parties, to give to other private organizations to do God only knows what with. But we do know that the purpose is to get around restraints that have been put on our government. So it's just a whole boatload of shady. And so the last episode was a fascinating rabbit hole, and it was an incomplete one because I can tell you that the National Endowment for Democracy, which is what I highlighted, that is not the only creepy tax money funneling private fund that's in the State Department, not by a long shot. And so I do recommend that episode. But in my research for that episode, I had stumbled upon a regime change effort happening right now by us in Venezuela. And that important information was buried like well over an hour into that episode. And one mistake that I made was not making that whole Venezuela thing its own episode. And so that's one mistake I'm going to fix today, because just like with Syria and Ukraine over the years, I do think it's important to have a standalone episode that we can refer back to so that newbies can get the backstory on what's going on as we continue to follow the new developments as they happen. And so that's one purpose of today's episode. But don't worry, even though you heard some of this stuff in the last episode, there's a lot of new stuff here. The repetition is minimal. But the other reason that I needed to revisit Venezuela today is that I made a mistake by oversimplifying some events that happened in Venezuela in the last few years. Now, I know that my job here, or at least the job I've given myself, is to simplify the complicated so that all of us can understand what's going on. But I did not do a good job because in this case, that oversimplification would lead you to make an incorrect conclusion about facts on the ground. But the problem is that I can't just quickly explain the mistake in the beginning of this episode like I usually do because, like I said, it's more complicated than I made it. So the correction of my mistake is going to be in the middle of this episode. But by the end of the main portion of this episode, you will no longer have been led astray by me, and you will have a lot more information about how specifically the Trump administration and the World Trade System moles in our Congress, who are members of both parties, are actively trying to replace the government of Venezuela. And as always, I've fact-checked all of this, and you can judge my sources for yourself in this episode's show notes. I do not expect you to take my word for any of this, so please check this stuff out for yourself. I am making it as easy as I possibly can for you. And if you support this work, please visit the support page on congressionaldish.com because you're not going to hear a single advertisement because this podcast is listener supported. But my goal here today is to tell you some of the things we are not being told by the corporate media and by those who are actively trying to replace Venezuela's government. It may sound today like I'm defending President Maduro of Venezuela and his economic system, but please understand that I really don't give a about how Venezuela chooses to run its economy. All I know is that to listen to the boob tube, you would think that Venezuela is being ruled by Hitler and everyone there is dying, and that is just not the case. And so, let's get started. The first thing you need to know about Venezuela, the most important thing, because it's key to everything, is that Venezuela has the largest confirmed reserves of oil in the world. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Iraq, more than Libya, more than Iran, Venezuela, when it comes to fossil fuels, is numero uno. Now, oil was first drilled in Venezuela way back in 1912, and when that happened, Venezuela was being governed by a military dictator who let the British multinational Royal Dutch Shell and the Rockefeller family's Standard Oil into Venezuela to take the oil and sell it for a profit, with few requirements that the Venezuelan people get a cut of the money. Flash forward to the 1970s, with oil prices soaring because the Middle East countries had cut off their oil supplies to the world, the president of Venezuela at that time created a national oil company. The profits of this company would not be handed out to shareholders, who are people rich enough to bet on the company in the Wall Street casino. But instead, the money and the profits would be used, at least partially, instead of taxes, to provide services that every human in Venezuela needs, like healthcare and education and homes. In the early 1980s, though, the price of oil fell. The income for the Venezuelan government being tied to the price and selling of oil meant that Venezuela found itself unable to afford the services it once could when the oil they were selling was bringing in the big bucks, a situation identical to what is happening in Venezuela today. At the end of the W. Bush years, the price of oil got up to almost $150 a barrel. Today, it's $65. And when the oil price tanked in the early 1980s, the Venezuelan president at the time took out the country's first IMF loan. Now, IMF stands for the International Monetary Fund, and the International Monetary Fund is one of the main three pillars of the economic system that I've nicknamed the World Trade System. This system was created after World War II, with the idea being that if the entire world operated under the same economic rules, then there would be no reason for war. There would be courts to work out their differences, and there would be peace. And it's not the dumbest idea, but unfortunately, the rules were written in a way that gives us peasants no role in it whatsoever. Because have you ever voted for your representative at the World Trade Organization? Yeah, me neither. They chose to set up an undemocratic system that prioritizes the needs of multinational corporations and their stockholders above everybody else. And we also have a 70-year history to look at now to see that in reality, despite all they say about spreading democracy, this system has served to force countries to allow the multinationals into the countries either through economic coercion or straight up war. The International Monetary Fund in particular is key to the economic coercion game, although there are other so-called development banks that do this too. But basically how it works is that the IMF loans governments money but with strings attached. The strings are that the countries can only get the money if they change their economic laws to match those of the World Trade System. That always means privatizing industries. Anything that can be done for a profit should be allowed to be done for a profit, especially by the multinationals. And then social services are required to be cut. This is branded as being for responsible governance, but in effect, it makes sure that the populations are forced to work for the private companies in order to survive. Because if we are a part of the World Trade System, if it is what feeds us, then we don't bite its hands. And from the late 1980s to the late 1990s, Venezuela's president attempted the reforms required for entry into the market economy in return for the IMF cash. Venezuela's president took the IMF loans and, as demanded, eliminated rules that hindered corporate profit. He also cut social services and promised to privatize Venezuela's telecommunications infrastructure, its aluminum, steel, and chemical plants, and its electricity grid. And most importantly, the nationalized oil industry also became, let's just say, less nationalized. During this time, Venezuela's government, with its balls firmly clasped by the IMF, signed 32 operating service agreements with 22 multinational fossil fuel companies, including ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, Total, effectively giving the private sector the Venezuelan oil to profit from again. The result of the World Trade System being welcomed back into Venezuela and the government's submission to the IMF reform demands was skyrocketing poverty for the population that was now receiving less services from its government. And there were deadly protests. There was one where the military killed hundreds of people. And in 1992, there was even an attempt by the military to overthrow the IMF reforming government. The coup failed, but the person who became the face of that coup attempt, who served about 2 years in prison because of it, became a celebrity. He became a hero to many people, and his name was Hugo Chavez. The movement that supports the ideas of Hugo Chavez is called Chavismo. And in 1998, because Venezuela is a democracy, Hugo Chavez was able to win the presidency by promising to reverse the IMF reforms and create a new constitution democratically. And after becoming president, as promised, Hugo Chavez freed Venezuela's balls from the IMF's grip and reversed the gains the World Trade System had made in his country. He wanted the resources of Venezuela to benefit Venezuelans. In November of 2001, Hugo Chavez signed 49 laws that made the market less free to operate as it pleased in Venezuela. One of the laws that caused the world trade system and the multinationals it serves the most outrage was the law of hydrocarbons, which increased the taxes that the fossil fuel companies had to pay, which, is the cut of profits that is reserved for Venezuelans. Well, the fossil fuel companies had to go from paying 1% of their money to Venezuela to 33.33%, one of the highest, if not the highest, royalty rates in the world, which according to the Library of Congress is still the tax rate for the profiteers today. And as you can imagine, the multinational fossil fuel companies that have our country and the world trade system by the balls would much rather pay Venezuelans only 1% or 0% if they can pull it off. But 1% for Venezuelans and the rest for shareholders is the better scenario for the multinationals than Chavez and Maduro's regimes have required. They've been requiring 33.33%. And to my no agenda brethren, I'm hearing it too. 33 is the magic number. I am totally hearing it right now. You are not alone. But 33.3%. The point I'm trying to make is that the multinationals had to go from giving 1% of the money it made from Venezuelan oil to the Venezuelans to a third of its money to Venezuela. And that is one rule that they want to rip up, that they want to deregulate. But in order to do that, a new president has to be installed because this guy, Chavez, and his Chavismos were not on the multinational side. Obviously, they couldn't be bought, and so they had to be eliminated. And so 6 months after those 49 laws were signed, there was an attempted coup d'etat. This was an attempted coup d'etat to overthrow Hugo Chavez, and it was a coup planned in partnership with the George W. Bush administration, an administration we all know was dominated by multinational fossil fuel industry titans, many of whom are back in charge of our government today. And so on April 11th, 2002, 18 people died during an anti-government protest that led to Hugo Chavez being removed from power by essentially being kidnapped by members of the military, his military, not ours, and flown by helicopter out of the capital. For 48 hours, the government was then led instead by the obviously unelected Petro Carmon, the head of Venezuela's largest business association, who immediately dissolved the Venezuelan Congress and the Supreme Court and canceled the Venezuelan Constitution, which had been democratically created as promised by Hugo Chavez in 1999. But 2 days later, Chavez was back in power and the Congress, Supreme Court, and Constitution were back in action with him. Technically, the coup worked, and we got to see what they were trying to do. They wanted to replace Chavez with a businessman, but it was short-lived. As for our country's involvement in this, we know for sure that about 200 members of the W. Bush administration knew beforehand that this coup was going to occur, and the State Department, including the creepy-ass National Endowment for Democracy that I geeked out on in the last episode, well, they were funneling money to the people involved in the coup. And so in April of 2002, there was a failed coup by force. And so 8 months later, there was an economic warfare coup that was tried. On December 2nd, 2002, the opposition, knowing that Chavez's government programs were funded heavily by fossil fuel profits, well, they sabotaged the Venezuelan oil company for 63 days. It started when the opposition called for a national strike on December 2nd, 2002, during which they announced that the goal of the strike would be to get Hugo Chavez, the democratically elected president, to resign. It was crystal clear that regime change was the goal. And during those 63 days, the anti-government people broke over 1,000 oil wells, something that apparently they still haven't completely fixed. And these people also sabotaged the technology controlling the oil production, essentially shutting it down by using hidden modems, the phone and internet systems, and by straight up destroying databases needed to keep the operations running. Again, the reason they did this as part of their clear and stated mission to get Chavez to resign is that the profits of the state oil company were being used instead of taxes to fund government programs like their healthcare system for all, their education system, their program that builds small, affordable houses for the middle and lower classes. All those programs were being funded by oil money. And so they figured that the destruction of the oil industry would cut off the government funding enough that it would cripple the economy, stop those services, and then the people in the military would blame that on Chavez, the public would turn against him and force him to go. And the oil company sabotage did hurt the economy and the Venezuelan people. The sabotage cost the Venezuelan oil company, and therefore the government, over $14 billion over the 2 months that this went on for. But Chavez didn't resign. Instead, he fired the people who did this from the oil company, which seems fair. So 2 regime change attempts happened in 1 year, one violent, one economic, both done by the people who wanted the private companies to be allowed to own Venezuela's oil again. And so seeing who his enemies were, Hugo Chavez not only withdrew from the world trade system, shutting out the private oil market, the private banking market, the private telecom market, and cutting off relations entirely with the International Monetary Fund, but he also encouraged others to do the same. He became a sworn, vocal, and effective enemy of the world trade system, and he was making friends. And this is the point where our governments, or the State Department, I should say in particular, made it very clear that they planned to sabotage Chavez politically. In 2004, the U.S. ambassador to Venezuela laid out the W. Bush administration's 5-point strategy for Venezuela and shared it with other U.S. State Department officials around the world. Now, I'm reading this 5-point strategy from a cable that was classified as secret, but then published for us by the angels at WikiLeaks. And so the focus of the State Department strategy was 1, quote, strengthening democratic institutions, unquote, so interfering in their democracy. 2, quote, penetrating Chavez's political base, unquote, so inserting moles into the group supporting Hugo Chavez. It also included, quote, dividing Chavismo, unquote, which means getting those moles to get Chavez's supporters to fight with one another. We also were, quote, protecting vital U.S. business, unquote, and that one speaks for itself. And then finally, our strategy was, quote, isolating Chavez internationally, unquote, so basically getting his friends to stop speaking to him. So the violent coup failed, the economic warfare failed, and the political warfare, well, the W. Bush administration tried them all, and none of them worked. And Chavez kept going. So in 2007, 3 years after that cable, Chavez renegotiated contracts for 4 giant oil projects in Venezuela in order to ensure Venezuela would have the majority shares as opposed to the multinational corporations having them. And the new contracts required increased tax payments from oil companies profiting from Venezuelan oil. Most companies renegotiated the contracts or came to some kind of settlement agreement with Venezuela, but some refused, including ExxonMobil, which wanted to maintain their control of 2 of those oil development projects, and also ConocoPhillips, who refused to renegotiate and pulled out of Venezuela as well. Instead of accepting less in profit and renegotiating with the government that was choosing to use oil profits to fund services for Venezuelans, these oil companies decided instead to pull out and sue Venezuela in the World Trade System courts, specifically the World Bank's International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. That is the World Trade System's main investor-state dispute settlement court. Basically, these judicial systems allow corporations to sue governments for money if those governments enact laws that negatively affect corporate profits, and the companies get taxpayer-funded settlements for those lost profits when they win. Taxpayers are not permitted to know how much the companies are demanding during the tribunals, which are judged by 3 rotating corporate lawyers. And taxpayers have no role in the World Trade System judicial system except that we pay the corporations when they win. We don't get to sit on juries that don't exist. Like I said, the World Trade System is not a democratic system, which if you can retain no other piece of information about it, retain that. Because so much of what the World Trade System pushers do, they do in the name of democracy, despite the fact that the World Trade System itself is not democratic at all. And the World Trade System has a bunch of these investor-state dispute settlement system courts that exist to ensure fairness and freedom to multinational corporations. And so, instead of renegotiating contracts or settlements with Venezuela when the country decided to take and use its oil wealth for its people, ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips sued Venezuela in a World Trade System court instead. In fact, they're suing in more than one of these courts. These corporate courts have popped up all over the world with every new trade agreement like herpes. And get this, one of the ways that they were able to sue Venezuela in more than one World Trade System court was to pretend to be Dutch. The way they did this is that ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips, companies frequently labeled as American, well, they shifted money to their branches in the Netherlands. And now, as investors from the Netherlands, they used a trade agreement between the Netherlands and Venezuela to sue Venezuela in one of these courts for a combined $42 billion in Venezuelan tax dollars. A lawyer who routinely argues for Venezuela in these cases called this move, quote, the Dutch sandwich, unquote. She said, quote, you put a Dutch holding in the middle of your company chain and you can call yourself Dutch, unquote. So 2 things here. 1, this is the type of nonsense that is counted as fair in this system. And 2, this just shows you that multinationals are stateless. They're not American. And ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips sure as hell aren't Dutch, and we all know it. But the world trade system is unfair enough to allow this to happen. And as for the results of the suits, ConocoPhillips less than 2 months ago was awarded $2 billion by the court operated by the International Chamber of Commerce, which is as corporate a name as I could ever think of. And the suit in the granddaddy of all corporate courts, the World Bank's court, is still ongoing. Venezuela, for its part, is refusing to pay ConocoPhillips, and now ConocoPhillips is trying to seize Venezuelan facilities outside of Venezuela. It's a mess. And as for ExxonMobil, this one's interesting. The ISDS court originally awarded ExxonMobil $1.6 billion, which is much less than the $10 billion they were demanding. But then last March, the court reduced that even further to just a few $100 million, as the court ruled that Venezuela's choice to nationalize their oil industry was internationally legal, and the compensation options offered to ExxonMobil were fair. So, sometimes the corporations don't win, which is nice to know. But anyway, got ahead of myself with that story there. Back to the Hugo Chavez years. In 2012, Venezuela withdrew from the World Bank's investor-state dispute settlement system because Hugo Chavez said that he didn't trust the procedures. And he shouldn't. None of us should. And I think I just told you why. And then, a year later, in 2013, Hugo Chavez died. And his report card, I do have to say, didn't suck. According to an infographic created by The Guardian the week Chavez died using the World Bank and the IMF's own data, while Chavez was president, unemployment was cut in half from 14.5% to 7.6%. Extreme poverty was dramatically reduced from 23.4% when he became president to 8.5% when he died. And as far as health is concerned, infant mortality rates decreased from 20 dead babies per 1,000 births to 13, and then life expectancy for everyone increased by 2 years. The only real negatives during his time as president were inflation, but fine. As far as quality of life measures, more people had jobs and income, way fewer people were living in extreme poverty, and more babies were surviving with the investments in their healthcare system, to which everyone had affordable access to. In fact, all Venezuelans were living longer due to the healthcare system paid in large part by fossil fuel profits. Speaking as a peasant, that's not a failure for the population as a whole. But 2013, he died, Chavez was gone, and before he died, he handpicked a bus driver named Nicolas Maduro to be his successor. But because it was never a dictatorship, there was an election, and Maduro won the month after Chavez died. And this is the point where I fucked up the story the last time. So this is what I said. Now, this guy is a lot like Chavez in policy. He's not welcoming the private companies back into Venezuela. He's not setting them free in his market. But he's not like Chavez in process. This Maduro guy does appear to be more dictatorial. And I say this because in late 2015, there was an election for the Venezuelan equivalent of Congress, their National Assembly. And the other party, so the party that Maduro is not a part of, they won 2/3 of the seats. And his reaction, instead of just dealing with the fact that they'd have a divided government politically, well, his reaction was to rig some Supreme Court assignments, and then that Supreme Court basically canceled the National Assembly. Just like, poof, you don't exist anymore. It's like if the Democrats took both houses of Congress in November, and then Trump got the Supreme Court to rule that Congress no longer exists, It's a major, major constitutional crisis, and it's a dick move. And then last year, almost exactly a year ago, elections were held for a new Congress. But a lot of Venezuelans didn't participate in that vote because they considered the National Assembly to still be their Congress. And so, Venezuela truly is a mess right now politically. And that's wrong. Hearing that again, it's not an oversimplification. It's just wrong. But, that's the conventional wisdom. Here's Senator Marco Rubio last July in a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing.
Imagine if the United States had an executive branch that basically took over the Supreme Court and put political cronies on it, canceled all funding and all function of the Congress, both House and Senate, went further and actually ordered the Capitol Police to attack the United States Congress if we tried to conduct our functions, cut off all operations, no salaries, no paper, no ink, nothing, no lights in terms of being able to meet. In essence, completely wiped out an elected National Assembly under the Constitution of that country. Imagine further, they announced we're not holding elections. We're not holding elections this year for governors and the legislative branch. We're not holding elections in the future for president. In fact, we're going to put together this fraudulent assembly, and we are going to impose a Cuban-style dictatorship under the guise of some sort of popular governance. That is the situation in Venezuela.
And that is also wrong. And so here's what I found out since the last episode. In late 2015, there was an election for the National Assembly, which is the Venezuelan Congress, in which the people who were not Chavismos, so not in the same party as President Maduro, won a majority of the seats. During the lame duck session of their Congress, the outgoing Congress, made up of Chavismos, filled the vacancies of 13 retiring judges out of 32 judges on the Supreme Court, which they were allowed to do even if it was a dick move to not wait until the newly elected Congress was sworn in. Just like how Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and friends refused to seat President Obama's Supreme Court pick and then quickly approved Trump's for that seat. It's a total dick move, but it was allowed. Now, the Venezuelan Supreme Court, with the new judges, then refused to seat 4 lawmakers after the start of the new Congress. 3 of the people that were not allowed to be seated were from the opposition, and 1 was a Chavismo. All of them were from the same state. And the reason that the Supreme Court said that they couldn't serve in Congress was because of voting irregularities in their districts. The effect of this ruling was that the members of the opposition were denied a supermajority in their Congress. And I don't know if this was on purpose or not. The world traders are saying it definitely was, that the Supreme Court is packed with cronies and made this ruling to help their guy, President Maduro. And I don't know if that's true, but the point is that the Supreme Court in Venezuela affected the results of a congressional election, kind of like how our Supreme Court stopped the voting recount in Florida and anointed George W. Bush to the presidency. But here's the part of the story that I didn't realize. Unlike here in the United States, when the Supreme Court interfered in our election and W. Bush just became president, Al Gore respected their ruling. While in Venezuela, the National Assembly ignored the Venezuelan Supreme Court ruling and sat the questionable representatives anyway, and then started the Venezuelan version of the impeachment process against President Maduro. Which means that the National Assembly was essentially breaking the law by defying the Supreme Court every time one of those lawmakers took a vote. Over the course of the next year and a half, the Supreme Court took away more and more power from the National Assembly on the grounds that the National Assembly was operating with people who shouldn't have been there, rendering the Assembly itself invalid. The Supreme Court also blocked every law passed by the National Assembly since there were people voting who weren't supposed to be there. This is what is being branded as Maduro dissolving Congress. But 1, it wasn't Maduro, it was the Supreme Court. And 2, that Congress had been defying a Supreme Court ruling for years by allowing people to vote who weren't allowed to. And the back and forth between the National Assembly and the Supreme Court just kept getting nastier and nastier. For example, the Supreme Court took away the National Assembly's ability to control the finances of the country, and then the National Assembly responded by trying to replace the entire Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court ruled unconstitutional. And so everyone was being sneaky and disingenuous, and it was a clear constitutional crisis, which is why in early 2017, Maduro initiated the process to write a new constitution. The rules they had in the constitution were not working. There was a crisis because their constitution was not working. And so Maduro's solution was to write a new constitution. And this was constitutional. The Venezuelan Constitution was written in 1999 when, fulfilling a campaign promise, Hugo Chavez started the process of creating the new constitution. Millions of Venezuelans had meetings to choose what they wanted in it. They combined all those ideas, and in the end, they had a nationwide election during which the constitution was approved by an overwhelming majority of people who showed up to vote. Over 70% of voters voted for this constitution. And in that 1999 Venezuelan Constitution, Article 347 to be exact, it gives the president and others the power to call a national constituent assembly for the purpose of, quote, transforming the state, creating a new judicial order, and drawing up a new constitution, unquote. And so, in 2017, that's what President Nicolas Maduro did. He convened a national constituent assembly, which is allowed by the Venezuelan Constitution, to rewrite the Venezuelan Constitution, which may or may not have been a good move. You know, the Chavismos, the people that supported Chavez and his movement and who are, at least in theory at this point, on Maduro's side, they loved the 1999 Constitution, and it was democratically created. So I don't know if, rewriting it is the right thing to do. But the thing you need to understand is that it is allowed for sure. And doing this is not some dictatorial move. And here's how the process works. So an election is held to elect 545 delegates to be on the National Constituent Assembly who will write the new Constitution. When electing those delegates, the candidates run as individuals, not as members of political parties, which, by the way, is essentially my dream for the United States, as we all know what a system controlled by two powerful parties corrupted by corporations looks like. Some of the delegates are picked based on geography, so picked by district, basically, and the rest are picked by 8 different economic groups: workers, students, indigenous people, employers, disabled, seniors, farmers, and fishermen. And so on July 30th, 2017, the Venezuelans had an election to choose the members of the Constituent Assembly, which are rewriting the Constitution of Venezuela right now. The way the election turned out, though, is that Maduro's party won damn near all of the seats. Why? Because the opposition, the anti-Maduro people, boycotted the vote, which predictably led to the Maduro people dominating, because that's what happens when you don't vote. Your side doesn't win. And unfortunately, there are widespread reports, even from people on Maduro's side, suggesting that the election wasn't counted entirely fairly, even though they're saying that even if it was, he probably would have won anyway because the opposition didn't show up. So, doing this was completely unnecessary. But there were a lot of safeguards, such as paper ballot backups in their electronic voting machines and ID checks, things that we haven't even implemented to protect our own elections here in the States. But those have been normal in Venezuela since 2004. And those were eliminated in the election that created the powerful Constitution rewriting Constituent Assembly. So there is cause for concern when it comes to the integrity of their elections. But what we were told at the time by disingenuous regime change advocates like Senator Marco Rubio and media outlets controlled by billionaires like the Washington Post, which is owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, well, we were told that this was all a way for Maduro to change the Constitution in order to postpone or cancel the 2018 presidential election and become a dictator, which didn't happen. A presidential election happened as scheduled on May 20th of this year, just a couple weeks ago. And so I was wrong and honestly lazy to make it seem like a straight up dictatorial move. It was much more complicated than that. The Supreme Court nullified the National Assembly because the National Assembly allowed people to vote who weren't supposed to, and they did this in violation of a Supreme Court ruling. The rewrite of the Constitution is allowed by their Constitution, and the way that it started was the proper way. Elections in Venezuela are still happening. For example, in October 2017, as determined by the newly elected Constituent Assembly, regional elections were held to elect the governors, even though people here in the States were saying those elections had been canceled. They weren't. And like I said, there was a Venezuelan presidential election just a few weeks ago. The government in Venezuela right now is changing, and the process is definitely not smooth and, verifiable for being legit. There are big problems, but it's not a black and white case of this guy is a dictator, the end. It's far, far more complicated than that, and we are only being told half the story by our corporate media, which we can never forget is funded by the companies that want to get into Venezuela in order to profit from the world's largest oil supply. Remember that every single time you see a TV commercial or a print ad for ExxonMobil or ConocoPhillips or BP or Shell or Chevron, those are the customers of television journalists and nationwide newspaper editors. You are not the customer. But as far as this independent podcast is concerned, I didn't look into any of this deep enough for the last episode, and I am sorry. I was in a rush and I learned a lesson. I promise I will at least try to never do that again. But I also want to take a quick minute here and read you a note from one of our financial contributors, one of the people who make this listener-supported podcast possible, and therefore is someone I listen to. And I usually do this. I read these notes at the end of every podcast, but this one belongs in the serious segment of this episode. This is a note from Sarah Downer, one of our Patreon supporters. She said, "Hi, Jen. I just finished listening to the most recent episode of Congressional Dish. I really love the show and I'm happy to support it. I started listening about 4 episodes ago and I've listened to some of the past ones too. However, something bothered me a bit about the Venezuela segment. First of all, I love that you're bringing attention to the fact that established U.S. policy is to attempt regime change, either openly or covertly, whenever another country's policies are inconvenient for us. 2 great resources on that, which you've probably read, I haven't seen all the show notes pages, are Legacy of Ashes, The History of the CIA and Enemies, and A History of the FBI, both by Tim Weiner. They have really opened my eyes to this reality, and I appreciate that you're bringing that out as well. And to answer your question, I am listening to the audio version of Legacy of Ashes. I'm in the mid-1980s right now, and I didn't know that there was a history of the FBI book, so thank you for telling me that. But yeah, the Legacy of Ashes, I can tell you for sure, tells you in so much detail our history of regime change. It actually, it gets a little boring after a while because there's been so many of them. But back to Sarah's note, she said, so in general, I'm totally with you. However, I think it would be great if next time you talked about our policy of regime change, you also talked a little bit about how complicated the issue becomes when the destabilization of the country in question, whether because of the U.S. in whole, in part, or not, causes the scale of human suffering that we see in Venezuela. That is when the waters get really muddy. And I agree with you that it's not the U.S.'s job to decide what the future of government in Venezuela could or should be. But I believe that we have to have some role in relieving suffering and empowering the citizens to start rebuilding some system of government. The fact that neoliberal/neoconservative ideologies are generally embedded in all of those efforts, a huge problem that doesn't relieve us of our obligation. So it's complicated, and I don't know what to do about it. But I do think the fact that there are people starving in Venezuela and citizens dying of illnesses that would be simple to cure because of a lack of basic medications and electrical failures in hospitals has to be named whenever we're talking about it. I think a lot about this as I see the situation at our own border, and I'm shocked at the horrors our government is inflicting on people who put their feet on U.S. soil. If the policies of this administration get more aggressive and authoritarian, and I think they will, I would want other countries to help us. Thanks for reading, Sarah. Well, first of all, thank you for writing, Sarah. And here's the first thing that I thought when you mentioned people dying from electrical failures in hospitals. I immediately thought of Puerto Rico, not Venezuela. And Puerto Rico is the United States. And so the first thing I would say is I would like my tax money to go towards solving these problems here in the United States, as Puerto Ricans are American citizens that also pay into this system and are not getting the proper return on our investment. So our obligation, as far as our resources and tax money are concerned, should be spent first on getting our own affairs in order. And our government services and our own democracy are currently a hot mess. And so there's that. But as far as the suffering of Venezuelans is concerned, I don't exactly know how to say this. But as far as the suffering of the Venezuelans, and I'm sure that some people in Venezuela are suffering, just like the people who live in tents under the highway 2 miles from where I live are suffering. I'm sure those situations exist in Venezuela too, as they do all over the world. But I think we may be viewing the Venezuelan suffering as a bigger problem than it is because it's being repeated so often. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. This is from March 2017. This is Senator Tom Udall of New Mexico in the hearing about Venezuela.
I didn't vote in favor of increased sanctions against Venezuela. I thought then, and I believe now, they're counterproductive and could lead to further entrenchment of the current Venezuelan regime. And that's exactly what happened. The Venezuelan people, many who oppose the government, are suffering. They're going without food, without medicine, without power, without the essentials.
Now, I did isolate that particular clip to make this point for a Regina George-like reason, because doesn't it seem ridiculous that some New Mexico bumpkin who can't even say Venezuela should have any role whatsoever in shaping our relationship with Venezuela? And I think this is a good example of someone not knowing what the hell they're talking about, because he can't even say the fucking name. So when he's telling us that there are all these people suffering and they're going without food and without medicine, without power, without the essentials, I don't know if this is a trustworthy source of information. And if you think I'm being harsh, come on, Jen, give the guy a break. He flubbed his words once, and you, Miss Briney, you flub him all the time. I hear that, but this wasn't a fluke.
Mr. Smildy, are you clear that taking a hardline approach to Venezuela will likely lead to a Cubanization of our policies there? Dr. ONeill, would you agree that in Venezuela, different factions now view the situation as a zero-sum game? As to Venezuela, can you outline what role you think the Foreign Relations Committee or others should take to encourage a multilateral effort to ensure that elections are held in 2018 and to prevent a Cubanization of policies in Venezuela?
This guy's sitting there for 3 hours? He's heard everyone say the name of the country, but Venezuela. So retarded. And I know I'm not supposed to say retarded anymore, but I don't care. He's retarded. It's a word that I'm not yet ready to give up. I love that word. But anyway, the point is that here he is saying that the Venezuelans are
without food, without medicine, without power, without the essentials.
And I haven't been to Venezuela, so I can't be sure, but I have serious doubts about the claims because they're being claimed by people, first of all, that I just don't think have done any research. I don't think this guy has gone there. He's clearly not. They don't know. And also because keeping in mind that aid and loans, that's what's used by the World Trade System to get countries to change their economic laws. That's always a part of the plan for getting countries integrated into the World Trade System. And so the ulterior motive that they would have for lying to say like these people really need aid, that motive is there. And last summer, a few months after that hearing took place, when ONeill and many others were plotting the regime change, and I'm going to play you more clips from that hearing in a minute. But at the same time that these claims of starving people are being made all over the place, well, on the July 11th, 2017 episode of her show, The Empire Files, Abby Martin went to Venezuela to find out for herself what was going on there on the ground. And full disclosure, The Empire Files is aired now on Telesur, which is a channel that is funded by a group of Latin American governments, including Venezuela. But also, full disclosure, I've met Abby Martin. We were on a panel together the last time I was on the Young Turks, and I got to spend about a half hour chatting with her before we went on the air. And my impression of her is that I found a kindred spirit. She's a fiercely independent journalist. And I truly believe that if Venezuelan officials, even the one who signs her checks, told her that she has to say anything, she'd tell them to go fuck themselves. But she's also friendly and artistic and shockingly normal and funny, despite the fact that she is a journalistic badass, taking chances that I'm simply too afraid to take. It was one thing for me to go to Puerto Rico after the hurricane for a workcation, but Abby went to Gaza to see what's happening there for herself. And she also, like I said, went to Venezuela. And so in her July 11th, 2017 episode, the one she personally recommended to me to help me understand what's happening on the ground, here's what she discovered about the claim that Venezuelans are starving.
Venezuelans are experiencing food shortages, with the majority of people saying they eat less and worse now than in recent years. The lines that people wait hours in are not simply to buy food in general. They're mostly to buy bread, due to the scarcity of flour. But with so many claims of empty shelves, I went to several supermarkets around the city with a hidden camera.
And here she is. There's a bunch of beans, canned goods, vegetables, Hello Cheetos, Captain Crunch. I mean, there's food everywhere.
So we just went to about 5 different supermarkets, and the shelves were fully stocked. And this is all types of neighborhoods, all types of classes. The shelves were stocked with everything from Nestle chocolate, all Coca-Cola products, fish, meat, vegetables, fruit. Although it is true, I did not find toilet paper at any of the stores. There's a multitude of other paper products, from Kleenex to paper towels to napkins. So while it is true that there are shortages, it seems like you are very able to find things for everyday life, no problem.
And then on top of that, another source that I use to see what people on the ground are saying is TripAdvisor. And no one is complaining on TripAdvisor about not being able to eat or access medicines or hospitals, which I imagine tourists would be upset about. In fact, I saw multiple people on TripAdvisor saying the portrayal of Venezuela as a dangerous place with no food and healthcare is false and should be ignored. And so that's why I just don't trust the depiction of life in the country that is being repeated a lot, because it doesn't match what Abby saw and recorded on the ground. And it doesn't match what tourists are saying on TripAdvisor. Venezuela is not Yemen. Go to the Yemen page and the advice from the mainland is just don't go there. And that's not at all what is being said on the Venezuelan pages. The biggest obstacle to enjoying yourself on the Venezuelan TripAdvisor is dealing with the currency. But there's also a lot of tips on how to exchange your dollars and get everything you need, including medicine and quality healthcare, by exchanging your cash in the black market. And actually, it's a pretty fascinating rabbit hole to go down just to see how people are dealing with this and how they're talking about, the way that they deal with getting cash. And it seems quite complicated. It's pretty nuts. But by all accounts that seem trustworthy, it appears that food itself is not hard to find in Venezuela, but instead it's certain products that are scarce. And it appears that private companies are holding back some essential products. And why would they do that? Well, it's a play out of a very old playbook, Private companies did this in the 1970s in Chile as a way to sabotage the economy to hurt President Salvador Allende, who we ended up eventually regime changing. And so we know that creating supply shortages is in the regime change playbook because we've done it before. And by we, I mean the multinational corporations. At this point, my government and the multinational corporations are one and the same. That's why I keep saying we. But as far as the general food scarcity is concerned, the problem, like I said, isn't necessarily that there's no food. The restaurants are open, there's food, but the currency has inflated so much that it's become unaffordable for some people to buy some of the products. And as far as the inflated currency is concerned, the inflation rate is all tied to Venezuelans' money's rate in relation to the US dollar. So we do have some opportunities for fuckery there, but I can't tell you what they are because I don't know. And that was a rabbit hole I didn't feel like going down. But one part of the story that we are not being told is that the Maduro government is not just doing nothing about it. Along with the currency inflation, the government has been raising the minimum wage over and over again. In fact, as of May 2017, the government had hiked the minimum wage 15 times. And so I understand what Sarah's saying, and I'm sure without a doubt that, Sarah, I bet you are a very good person and you don't want anyone to suffer. And I think that's why the propaganda is designed this way. You know, they're counting on us wanting to help. And I appreciate that perspective. But if there's one thing that I've learned in this research, it's that we are being bullshitted when it comes to Venezuela. At the very least, we are being told only one side of the Venezuelan story. We are being told that everything is horrible in Venezuela and that the government is doing absolutely nothing. And that's just not true. You know, the Maduro government is a continuation of Chavismo, which is based on the government doing far more than our government, our free market government, to provide economic security to the population, especially for the poor and the suffering. You know, it's not freedom for the market there. It's not freedom for private companies at all. These companies are allowed in the country, but only as long as they agree to Venezuela's terms and share a significant amount of the profits with the Venezuelan people. Remember, the deal that oil companies got in the late 80s from the guy who was implementing the World Trade System reforms was a 1% share of oil revenue for the Venezuelan people. The Chavismos changed that to 33.33%. And the Venezuelan government keeps raising the minimum wage. And who pays that? The companies. The regulations of the Maduro government are costing the companies money. And so the people who want a new free market government that will change the terms back in the multinationals' favor, well, they're trying to convince us that Venezuela's economic model is a disaster and that it doesn't work at all. But with that 1/3 of a share of the fossil fuel money, the Chavez administration created programs to teach students music and art so that in Venezuela, artists don't have to starve. They also have housing projects that have built over 1.5 million affordable homes for the poor. Here, I can tell you, our poor people live in tents under the freeway, if they're lucky enough to get a tent. As far as education is concerned, the number of people in school doubled since Chavismo started. And college attendance, due to the government providing higher education, has increased 7 times. Chavismo's also increased pensions for retired people, which contributed to a huge drop in extreme poverty rates. I told you it went from like 20-something to 8. As far as healthcare is concerned, infant mortality dropped in half. But here's the thing, the new guy, Maduro, he took over right when the oil price crashed. And so now they're struggling to fund all this, especially since their government is so dependent on money from oil sales, and they can't seem to get their currency under control. But if they could make this work, they might inspire other governments to use taxes to provide basic needs to their people instead of allowing private companies to do literally everything for a profit, which is an idea of the World Trade System. You know, the idea that you use these industries to fund government instead of profits, this is not an idea that can be allowed to spread. Here's Senator Bob Menendez. This is a Democrat. This is part of the resistance who's been sanctioned by Venezuela. This guy is not allowed to step foot in Venezuela because of his clear regime change goals. Well, here's Senator Bob Menendez in his opening statement in the March 2017 hearing about Venezuela in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Even as their president prevents international support for the basic humanitarian needs of its citizens, blocking an effort by the National Assembly to facilitate international assistance, they are voting to demand fundamental freedoms. Despite the suffering of his people and the international outcry, Maduro insists on clinging on to the shreds of a failed ideology his predecessor and a few colleagues in the region still champion.
You know, this isn't about Nicolas Maduro. This is about the way they are structuring their government, and it goes back to Chavez. It's not the men, it's the socialism. It's the economic system that doesn't adhere to the World Trade System rules based on freedom for multinational corporations. And so I think we are, and have been for a while, targets of a propaganda campaign preparing us for a regime change. And now I'm going to prove it to you. As I saw this hearing, I've played you some of the clips already, but this March 2017 hearing, this is where the steps were planned. And the committee to watch in Congress for information on the Venezuelan regime changes progress is definitely the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, because last March there was this off C-SPAN hearing. And so this was a hearing that was not aired on television anywhere in the United States. And in this hearing, they clearly discussed strategies for replacing Venezuela's government. And now we're seeing what they discussed happening in real time. And of course, I have the highlights for you. So, to understand what they are talking about in many of these clips, you first need to know what the Organization of American States is, or OAS. That's how they refer to it. We first learned about the OAS in the episode I did about the World Trade Organization, where I played the clips of the creepy world leaders who created the World Trade System, discussing their plot to have the entire world adhere to their economic system. And sitting at that table was one of the first officials at the Organization of American States when it was created, along with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund right after World War II. So this is a big part of the World Trade System. It's an organization made up of the Latin American World Trade System countries. And in this clip I'm about to play for you, you're going to hear this lady say something about the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which was adopted on September 11th, 2001. In this document, it says, quote, the peoples of the Americans have, and I'm not saying that the fact that it was adopted on 9/11, like actual 9/11, was some kind of like conspiracy. Like, I don't have any reason to think that at all. It kind of took me aback where I was like, wait, this was signed on 9/11? Like, what the f? You can't put the vote off a day considering it's like 9/11. So I just found that super weird that was the day that 9/11, I don't know. Anytime 9/11 comes up, we all just kind of go like, But anyway, in the Inter-American Democratic Charter signed on 9/11, it says, quote, the peoples of the Americas have a right to democracy and their governments have an obligation to promote and defend it, unquote. All right. So this is all about democracy. And then it says, quote, when the special session of the General Assembly determines that there has been an unconstitutional interruption of the democratic order of a member state and that diplomatic initiatives have failed, the special session shall take the decision to suspend that member from the exercise of its right to participate in the OAS by an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the member states in accordance with the charter of the OAS. The suspension shall take effect immediately. It also says, quote, notwithstanding the suspension of the member state, the organization will maintain diplomatic initiatives to restore democracy in that state, unquote. So regardless of the fact that the country would no longer be a member of the OAS would still be able to operate in that country to change the government into whatever they consider democracy. And so invoking the Inter-American Democratic Charter is essentially the process for kicking a country out of the OAS and letting the OAS do whatever it does to shape that country's government into, again, their definition of democracy. So now that you know that, here is Dr. Shannon ONeill. She is from the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a World Trade System thing that we talked about many times. But she's from the Council on Foreign Relations, and she is giving advice to our Congress last March.
Multilateral initiatives are perhaps more important and potentially more fruitful as a means to influence Venezuela. Now, this will mean working behind the scenes to galvanize opposition and condemnation for the Maduro regime. This will be more effective than U.S. efforts alone, as it will be much harder for the Venezuelan government to dismiss the criticisms and the actions of its South American neighbors as imperialist overreach. And such a coalition is much more possible today than in any time in the recent past, due both to the accelerating repression and the breaking of the last democratic norms in Venezuela, and due to the very different stances of South America's recently elected leaders, particularly in Peru, in Brazil, and in Argentina. The OAS remains a venue and an instrument to focus these efforts. The U.S. should call on the organization to again invoke the Inter-American Charter and to evaluate Venezuela's democratic credentials and its compliance with them. And this could lead potentially to sanctions and suspension of Venezuela from this multilateral body.
So a couple of things here. First, did you guys catch the opening of that rabbit hole? Because this lady from the Council on Foreign Relations said that getting the OAS to work with the U.S. efforts is going to be easier because of new leaders in Peru, Brazil, and Argentina. And I don't have time to learn about 3 more countries today, but if you guys know things, please send links to @JenBriney on Twitter, because what has gone down recently in Peru, Brazil, and Argentina? I don't know. But more importantly, her advice is to invoke the 9/11 Charter to kick Venezuela out of the OAS, which would allow the OAS to do their thing to restore democracy. And expanding on that idea was Senator Ben Cardin, again, a Democrat, member of the Resistance of Maryland, talking to Mark Fierstein, who is a former State Department official in the Clinton years and special assistant to President Obama, who now works at the war planning think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and who is also a senior advisor for Madeleine Albright's company that advises multinational corporations how to make money around the world, the Albright Stonebridge Group. Here is their conversation.
We look at ways in which we can change the direction here, and it starts with the governance. When you have a corrupt government, it's going to be very difficult to see international organizations willing to come in to help refinance their economy. Even though they have wealth, it's going to be difficult to figure out how that takes place unless they have basic changes in the way their government's doing business. And we don't see any indication that that's taking place. So you've made a couple suggestions. One is that we need to work with our regional partners, which I fully agree. So let's start with OAS, which is the entire region, as to whether it's realistic that the democratic charter provisions can in fact lead to change in Venezuela. Ultimately, it will require us to have the threat of at least 2/3 of the countries if we're going to be able to invoke the charter with some teeth. What is the likelihood that OAS could be effective as a real force in bringing about change by the Maduro government? Mr. Fierstein?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And actually, if I can hit on your two other points as well. First, with regard to humanitarian assistance, under the Obama administration, USAID, in fact, did put together a contingency plan to provide assistance if, in fact, even when the Venezuelan government is willing to receive it. And USAID has a warehouse in Miami and is prepared to provide assistance. I know international organizations are prepared as well. There has been some dialogue between the government and the American Development Bank with regard to economic reform, though frankly at fairly lower levels, and there's no indication that at senior levels that they're inclined at serious attempts at economic reform.
So that's them talking about the strengths. The World Trade System Bank is ready to give them money, but there's, quote, no indication at senior levels that they're going to do any of the economic reform. Hence, that's the need for the new government.
With regard to the OAS, I think that we're much better positioned now than we were a couple of years ago. And that's because of some changes in some key governments in the region, Argentina, Peru, Brazil. There was a reference to Ecuador, potential change there.
Heads up, Ecuador. So let's add that one to our watch list.
As well. And I think that patience has clearly run out with Maduro. I think countries are more inclined now to take action. There has been a hesitation to do so as long as the dialogue was alive and as long as the Vatican was engaged. One of the challenges has been with regard to the Caribbean countries, which receive significant petroleum assistance from Venezuela, and that has somewhat silenced them, and there's been some divisions within the Caribbean. That said, I'm hopeful that in the coming months, that as the situation deteriorates in Venezuela, and as that it becomes clear that the dialogue cannot be successful unless there is more pressure. And I think there needs to be three forms of pressure. There needs to be domestic mobilization within Venezuela in the form of protests. I think there needs to be additional sanctions applied by the United States and other countries. And I think there needs to be action within the OAS, including a threat of suspension of Venezuela from the organization if it does not comply with the Inter-American Democratic Charter.
And so there they are off of television talking about how we need to do three things. Number one, more protests, which sounds like it should be something out of their control, but we have a long, long history, our CIA in particular, of prepping for regime changes by paying violent people to protest. Protests were a factor in Syria, where we know we've given millions of dollars, weapons, and training to the opposition. And they were also factors in Ukraine. In fact, Republican Senator John McCain and Democratic Senator Chris Murphy spoke on stage at one of those anti-government protests in Ukraine, even though this is how John McCain talks to peaceful protesters here at home.
You know, you're going to have to shut up or I'm going to have you arrested. Get out of here, you low-life scum.
Such a hypocrite. But anyway, step one are the protests, which we all know are happening. And if you watch the Empire Files, badass journalist Abby Martin went to the anti-government protests and personally witnessed the protesters setting streets on fire. So I put links to her videos in the show notes if you want to see them. But there are people raising hell in Venezuela. So step one is underway. And so let's look at step two, additional sanctions by the U.S. and other countries. What's happened on that front? Well, a few months after this hearing in August 2017, President Trump enacted new sanctions. These sanctions prevented U.S. companies and citizens from buying certain kinds of Venezuelan government debt and bonds, and also prevented companies and citizens from purchasing most securities issued by the Venezuelan government, which cuts off the Venezuelan government from sources of cash. So when you want to talk about their currency problem, that happened in August of 2017. A month after that, in September of 2017, after forming an association with the United States, Canada enacted sanctions against 54 Venezuelans, including President Maduro himself. Then on March 19th, 2018, on the 15-year anniversary of the Iraq regime change, President Trump enacted more sanctions prohibiting U.S. citizens from buying any digital currency created by the Venezuelan government because Venezuela is trying to create a new cryptocurrency to try to deal with their inflation problem and to get around the World Trade System sanctions. Then 2 months later, on May 21st, 2018, one day after President Maduro's re-election, Trump placed more sanctions on Venezuela's oil company, preventing any U.S.-based company or citizen from buying debt from the Venezuelan government or its oil company, which, by the way, the Venezuelan oil company is the owner of Citgo. And so every time you see a Citgo sign, go Red Sox, that's Venezuela's company. And then a week and a half later, Canada announced new sanctions too, freezing the access of 14 more Venezuelans. So step two, that's happening. And then there's step three, action within the Organization of American States to threaten Venezuela with suspension, which happened 2 weeks ago. So right after the Maduro re-election on June 4th, our new Secretary of State, the Koch brothers' bitch, Mike Pompeo, spoke at the Organization of American States. And this is what he said.
In addition to suspension, I call on fellow member states to apply additional pressure on the Maduro regime, including sanctions and further diplomatic isolation, until such time as it undertakes the actions necessary to return genuine democracy and provide people desperately needed access to international humanitarian aid.
You know, you would think that an organization that has a quarter of the world's countries in it could afford better microphones. But yeah, so that was Mike Pompeo on June 4th. And then the very next day, June 5th, here's Mike Pence, our vice president, speaking to Organization of American States members at the White House.
Tomorrow, the General Assembly will have the opportunity to begin the process of suspending Venezuela from membership and participation in the OAS. And so tonight, on behalf of President Trump, I call on the community of free nations from across this new world to expel the Maduro dictatorship from the Organization of American States. The OAS must stand for freedom. And now's the time.
And the vote was taken the next day. You know, the regime changers needed 24 countries to vote yes to actually suspend Venezuela, but they only got 19. And so their efforts failed this time. But it shows you that they are doing exactly what they said they would to try and get Venezuela kicked out of the OAS, which has only happened to two countries in the past. One was Cuba. Cuba was suspended in 1962 and then refused to rejoin when offered the chance in 2009. And then the other one was Honduras, which was temporarily suspended after a military coup. That's the military coup that Hillary Clinton was involved in and that she helped legitimize as Secretary of State by working with the OAS to set up new elections, which installed, by the way, a pro-business guy who immediately started privatizing the natural resources of Honduras. So, you know, instead of insisting that the elected Chavez-like leader be given his presidency back, that's what Hillary Clinton decided to do. And now Honduras is back in the OAS, and it voted along with the US and Canada, Argentina, Peru, and Brazil, and not enough others, to kick out Venezuela. So Honduras was flipped. But Venezuela is still a work in progress. And Shannon ONeill of the Council on Foreign Relations also had one more piece of advice.
One thing that has in the past in Venezuela brought the opposition together is elections. right, is a mechanism that you're pushing towards a particular goal. And so as we look forward for 2017, there's a party registration process that is about to begin, and there's questions about who may or may not qualify there, and if the National Electoral Committee will actually play fair in that sense. That is something that you could rally together different groups if it's seen unfair in terms of qualifications. And then we have pending elections that did not happen at the end of last year, regional elections that may or may not be put on the table. And so I think internally a push for elections, because that is a constitutional mechanism for parties to participate in democracy, and perhaps outside as well, we can be pushing for these parts. Even we know democracy is not existent there anymore, but can we push for elections? Can we push? And that's something at least to galvanize those that are not in power today.
And after President Maduro's re-election on May 20th, here's Mike Pence, our vice president, speaking to the OAS members at the White House on June 5th.
The election held 2 weeks ago was a disgrace. The regime had banned major parties, barred opposition leaders from standing for office. On Election Day itself, Maduro's henchmen engaged in widespread intimidation and illegal actions, rigging the vote to silence the people's voices and ensuring victory for the regime's failed socialist ideology.
Everything Congress was told would help make regime change happen in Venezuela has been happening. Protests, sanctions, threats from the OAS, and an election, which may or may not have been shady, but there's been no independent officials that have investigated anything, and it's only been a few weeks, even if they did. But the election is definitely being used to galvanize those who are not in power in Venezuela today, meaning the world traitors. And so this regime change is in motion. But it's important to always prepare for success. And so here's Dr. Shannon ONeill of the Council on Foreign Relations with some advice for if and when regime change comes to Venezuela.
And then finally, the United States should begin preparing for change. If the Maduro regime is forced out or it collapses, the country will likely face humanitarian, economic, and financial chaos. And there are two particular things the United States can start preparing for. The first is a wave of refugees. This will hit Venezuela's neighbors the hardest: Brazil, Colombia, Guyana, nearby Caribbean nations. And it's important to help them with money, with supplies, potentially with personnel, and to back international NGOs and multilateral efforts to ease the suffering of these people. The second aspect to prepare for is a restructuring of Venezuela's finances and its economy. A new government will need to renegotiate $140 billion worth of external debt, whether or not the government has already defaulted upon it or not. And this massive undertaking will likely require an IMF rescue package and the backing of the international community and creditors. The U.S. will be vital in facilitating this, as well as in helping a new government take the tough economic policy choices to turn the economy around. These will include freeing the exchange rate, reinducing market prices, creating sustainable policies for the poor, and rooting out corruption. And though this is complicated, the faster it occurs, the faster Venezuela's economy will grow again.
Tough economic policy choices. The economic law changes always required in return for World Trade System cash, and they should do it as fast as possible. You know, this recipe for regime change is remarkably consistent, and it's impossible to miss once you know to look for it. And the reason that regime change is essential to start the aid in return for economic reform process was made clear by Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who, by the way, wrote an op-ed last month titled, quote, "It's time to hasten Maduro's exit from power," unquote.
On the USAID piece, there's a reason why we're not in there. They don't let us. The Venezuelan government does not allow open aid because they deny that there's an emergency.
And so they need to tell us that there's an emergency so that we can force the aid upon them. See what I mean? There's a reason why we need to think that there's a big emergency in Venezuela, whether there is or not. And like I said, I haven't been there, but I know someone who has, and she brought a camera. But the point I want you to walk away with is that there is a regime change effort happening right now by the world traitors in Venezuela. And it's supported by Republicans like Senator Marco Rubio and Democrats like Senator Bob Menendez, himself a corrupt son of a bitch. The only reason his ass isn't in jail for bribery is because of a hung jury. So much for the resistance. And then there's Trump, Mr.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake, all right?
But now
we have many options for Venezuela. And by the way, I'm not going to rule out a military option.
And apparently he's saying the same stuff behind closed doors to little Marco.
I also know this, and I do not speak for the president, but I've certainly spoken to the president, and I will only reiterate what he has already said, and I've been saying this now for a number of days. I have 100% confidence that if democracy is destroyed once and for all in Venezuela on the 30th in terms of the Maduro regime, the President of the United States is prepared to act unilaterally in a significant and swift way. And that is not a threat. That is the reporting of the truth.
And what happened on the 30th was the vote for that Constituent Assembly, which we all know did happen, and they are rewriting their constitution. So that's what he's talking about. And so little Marco has 100% confidence that Trump is ready to regime change if that thing happens. And it did. And so the point of all this is that they're clearly implementing the steps that the regime changers in both parties worked on in their committee over a year ago. It's being implemented right now and before your eyes. And so keep your eyes open, because now you know what to look for. If you enjoyed this episode of Congressional Dish, please financially support it to keep it going, because this is not a podcast that I feel comfortable taking ads for two reasons. One, ads corrupt people because you don't want to bite the hands that feed you. And if the corporations feed you, well, there you go. And also, I hate ads, so I'm not going to ruin my show with ads. And also, you hate ads, and it's stealing your time, and I'm just not going to do it. So, screw ads, support Congressional Dish. And there are so many different ways that you can do this. All of them are listed for you on the support page on congressionaldish.com. But if you want to do it regularly, you have PayPal, Zelle, checks, Patreon. That one is per episode. You guys can do one-time contributions with checks or Venmo. We take Venmo. There's so many different ways. Support page on congressionaldish.com. But I do want to give you one quick note. For those of you who hate the golf swing, that just want to hear my F-bombs fly, we are so close to the goal on Patreon, because the deal is I will pay for the extra effort that it's going to take to do a separate feed that is with no golf swings. And I will give that to the people who pay for this show. And the goal is to get to $1,500 an episode on Patreon. We only have $125 left, guys. And once we get it, then I can start doing that feed. So $125 left. Please go to Patreon if you're not supporting. Every little bit helps. I know some of you guys write to me and you're like, I can only afford $1. Then afford $1. If everybody contributed $1, we would be just fine. So it's all the people that are contributing nothing. Those are the people that are the problem. And so if you're in that category, contribute something. Something is better than nothing. And what you get in return for Patreon supporters, it's super easy for you. I give you the unedited thank yous, which are conversations I have with my friends. You get to hear the edited portion for free. You're going to hear it next. Today is my friend Pat, who is going to join me. But there's also an unedited version where you hear more about our personal lives, and there's no golf swing on it. And you get that if you financially contribute to the show. And if you're someone who wants it, but doesn't want to contribute on Patreon, contribute any way you want to and email Lauren@congressionaldish.com. So there are extras now for people who financially contribute. But the most important thing is that we're not being told a lot of stuff, because our information is being filtered through a corporate lens, and I refuse to do it that way. And so I'm trying a different thing. If you guys support the effort to have independent, I know that this is journalism, but really it's the independence that's important here. And so if you support the independence of this podcast, and if you support, having a source of information that's not filtered by anybody, please support this, because I can't keep doing it without you. So thank you. Okay, so today joining me to do the thank yous is my friend Pat. How do I say your last name? Grogan?
Yeah, Grogan. You got it.
I've never actually said it out loud. I've only seen it in writing, so I apologize for not knowing your last name despite being friends with you for years.
No problem. Well, you know it now.
Yes, I do. So I feel less stupid. But thanks for joining me today. And what we're here for is to thank everyone who's making my podcast possible, because we know, fuck ads, so I don't take any of them. So the one thing that I do want to let people know before I start thanking everyone is that anyone who sent in checks to the Florida address, those are going to be included in the next episode, because as Lauren says on my thank you list, it says Lauren sucks. My sister Lauren does all the thank yous. So a lot of this stuff I don't even see until I get her note, right? So I'm at Dom's wedding and I get a text from my sister. Lauren's my sister. And she's like all upset. And she's like, I didn't order. I guess she tried to order the checks because all our checks go to Florida. And then we order them and they go to her. she tried to order them and she like didn't press send or something. And she tells me this and she's like, they won't be here in time. And I'm like, okay, I don't give a like that's as much as I care.
What kind of checks are you talking about?
So people send in physical checks to the show. So they pay on PayPal, Zelle, I get Venmos, they send in checks. And when they send in checks, instead of, cause like I move all the time. So I had a P.O. box in Oakland when I first moved there. Then I switched to Walnut Creek. Now I live in Alameda. So what we decided to do is there's this service. It's called My RV Mail. And it's for olds that live in RVs. So what it does is people send my stuff there and then I can just have it forwarded to wherever I am. So this way we only have to change the address this one last time to the Florida address and then everything just gets shipped wherever. So instead of the checks coming to me, they go to Lauren because she's my CFO.
Gotcha.
So she does all the accounting and she also does these thank you lists for me. And so she'll match the checks to the emails and that way we can read people's notes. And it's actually way more difficult than it sounds like it would be to match all of this stuff. So that's Lauren's job. And so anyway, she sends me the thing. She's just like, yeah, I didn't get them sent in on time. And I'm like, okay. Apparently she was so upset. She told me she was crying and she was like afraid I was going to be super mad at her or that she let me down. Like, so Lauren has in all caps here. They will be included in the next episode because Lauren sucks with a sad face, but I'm not at all upset about this. And I don't think anyone who listens to the show is going to be upset about this. So, Lauren, it's fine.
Well, yeah, she takes her job seriously. Nothing wrong with that.
Totally, which I love. And that's why I want her to be the person that does this because I'm way too easygoing with people I work with. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. But she's my sister and I know that it's just in her blood. She's not going to get relaxed about it. So I love it. But at the same time, to put in all caps, like Lauren sucks. That's definitely Lauren saying that. It's definitely not me. So yeah, she's the best. But yeah, so checks will be in the next episode. No worries. We probably got them. Also, if you guys want to donate but don't want your name read on air, just tell Lauren at congressionaldish.com in an email so that we don't accidentally say your name. Yeah, so let's get started today with the people that are subscribers, and subscribers are the best. These are the people that let me budget. So these are the ones that contribute either on PayPal on a monthly basis. They can do Patreon on a per episode basis. We have people that send in paper checks whenever the hell they feel like it. So I have one guy who does weekly, Ryan. I have, there's also a guy who does on Zelle, Ruben. So he also does weekly, but most people do monthly. It's just like people just do whatever they feel like doing. So subscribers is just the name we use for people that contribute regularly. And this we got a raise from Matthew Von Itter. We have a raise from $5 an episode to $10 an episode. So thank you, Matthew. We also have $10 an episode coming in from Amy Scudder. Thank you, Amy. We are also now getting $10 an episode from Jennifer Disser, and she left a note. It says, Jen, holy crap, your show is an eye-opener. I really appreciate the investigative work you do and the education you provide. After listening for a month or two, I'm finally getting around to setting up an ongoing $10 per episode contribution. I'd love to set it up in a system that doesn't take a cut of the contribution, but I like the appeal of getting something extra that comes with Patreon, and I understand they deserve something for providing that ability. So that's kind of like the deal that we have going today. If you and I go off on a tangent and we start talking about our friends or whatever, like I'm going to leave it there, but I have it on the feed just for Patreon. But what I'm struggling with is I want everyone who contributes financially to have access to it. So right now, Patreon's the only thing that gives me the ability to easily share something that's kind of locked up like that. And so for anyone that wants the extended thank yous where we talk about whatever, just email Lauren at congressionaldish.com. We've jerry-rigged a system and I'm working on a better one, but it just doesn't exist right now for non-corporate clients. Like, just trust me, it's so expensive for me to have a private feed.
Absolutely.
And it's crazy. Yeah. There's no reason for it. All I'm asking for is a feed that I control, and they make it way too hard except for Patreon. So that's all that is. If you did want to switch your subscription out of Patreon, which you're totally allowed to do, and go to one of the commissionless options, which would be Zelle, Venmo, and paper checks, you can go ahead and do that and I'll get you the file, is basically what I'm trying to say.
So you're just basically reading thank you notes. That's really cool. Like, how many people donate to your podcast?
It fluctuates.
Okay.
But my dad and my sister since January have actually been taking care of my finances, because for the last 5 years, I've just been doing it on the back of an envelope, like in pencil. So that's terrible accounting. I've had no idea, but they're actually keeping track of this stuff now. So we think we have a few hundred contributors that are always contributing something, either monthly or per episode. And then there's more people that just contribute whenever they feel like it. And it fluctuates, man. That's been the hardest part for me, where I feel like I knock an episode out of the park and no money comes in. And then I'll do one that I think is no big deal, and like a whole bunch of money comes in. And I don't know if it's correlated, and I don't know what's going on. And I'm trying to get myself to the point where I'm not so emotional about that, because that's been tough the whole time, just having my income not really connected to the quality of the work.
Well, that's what's cool about the subscribers.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a steady base of subscribers, then basically that will kind of, be your baseline.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's how I count it too. And that's why it's nice that my dad and my sister are working out this whole spreadsheet thing, so I can have an idea of what my budget is. Because right now I use this subscriber money to pay. So I have a company called Pro Podcast Solutions. We've been working together for 3 years, I think. I can't even remember what life was like before them, but they do all the editing for the show. So it's like when I get clips, they're the ones that create them for me. They transcribe them for me. They send that back. Then when I give them the files, they make it sound better. They'll take out my long pauses or whatever, So they're the editors. I also pay my sister for her accounting. I have a VA that does all the show notes. So with that money, with that subscriber money, that's how I'm able to afford that stuff, because those are regular expenses. And then the extra money I kind of put aside, and that's what affords the conferences and whatever else. But I'm working on other things, I'd like to do merchandising, but that has upfront costs and I don't know if I can afford it. And I want a social media manager, because I hate social media more than just about anything in life. So I'm not the right person to do it.
Yeah. Weren't you on social media all day though?
Yeah. And you know what? It's so funny you say that, because I was thinking that this whole weekend I wasn't on Twitter and I was so happy. And then today I went back on social media and I was miserable this afternoon. And I think that that's a part of it, man. It's just such a barrage of nonsense.
It's crazy. You know what? I left my phone in the Uber on Saturday night. And I didn't get it back till Monday. And I didn't have my phone or anything for, like a day and a half. And it was a pretty great experience. So,
right?
Yeah. It was so liberating. The only issue is that it's no issue for me, but the only issue is like the people on the other side kind of freak out. They're like, well, where are you? Why aren't you messaging back? Or like I had a bunch of like voicemails and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But as far as me, like I loved it. I had like a free Sunday. No
interruptions.
Yeah, no text messages.
That sounds like heaven.
Yeah.
I love that. I feel like I have to have a social media presence, but it really does make me miserable sometimes, especially on days like today. Like the reason that today was making me so crazy is today was the day that for 2 months, we've been getting this trickle of news about children who are at the border being separated from their parents. And every day is a news story about it. And it's just been really upsetting me and Joe. Like the more I hear about it, it's like, how is this okay? How is this even happening?
So do you think all those stories are true?
I have no reason not to, especially because like my question was, okay, why are all these stories coming out now?
Yeah.
And then I watched a hearing with the head of the Department of Homeland Security, Kirsten, or there's a weird J in the beginning of her name, but it's Kirsten Nielsen. And she said that this was a policy that they are doing on purpose. There's a change. So it used to be that, and that hearing was like a month ago, but I just recently saw it. And it used to be that someone would cross the border illegally. If it's their first time, it's a misdemeanor. So it's like smoking a butt, out on my balcony in a no smoking building. I mean, it's a misdemeanor. It's the same level of offense. So they used to be that these people would go to a civil court, in which case they're not housed in a jail. They're still with their kids. What kind of sucks, and where I do see the Republicans' point on this, is these people cross the border illegally and then they're just set free. And if they don't show up to their court date, like, okay, they're here now. So the policy doesn't make sense, and I get that. But what they decided to do, the policy switch, is now they're prosecuting everyone, 100% of them, in criminal proceedings, which means that they get locked up until their court dates. And because there's so many more, and they didn't prepare for this, it was just like, boom, we're changing this. The courts aren't prepared to handle this, so the detainments are longer. And when you put an adult in jail, the adult and the child are not allowed to be housed together. And so that's why the kids are being sent somewhere separately. But in order to make that legal, they have to say that these kids are unaccompanied. And it's like this whole big mess. But what it's resulting in, and the thing that really matters to me, is that we have people that are getting arrested in South Texas and their children are ending up in New York City.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like with every day, with more information we found out about this and how chaotic this whole implementation is, it reminds me actually of the travel ban. Remember, it was like, and you are banned now.
Yeah.
Go. It's the same type of thing.
Sounds like a piece of paper he's holding up. Yes.
Yeah. As of right this minute, you're not allowed here. So there's people on planes that show up and they're like, what the hell do you mean I'm not allowed? I got my visa. It's kind of the same thing that's been happening for 2 months, but because the policy went into place, it took a minute for the kids to get separated from the adults, end up all over the country, for us to find out about it. So that's why I think it's hitting a head now, even though it's been, I think, 6 weeks or so since this really started being implemented. And it was just really upsetting me. And then, so yesterday I was really upset about it. And so I was just retweeting a lot of stuff about it. And I tweeted to Trump because he said the law was forcing him to do this. I know. Why is anyone even paying attention to what I tweet to Trump? It was just like, there's 34,000 comments. Like, how do you even see it? But he said something along the lines of, the law is forcing me to do this, which is straight horse because it was the same law that was being used by the W. Bush administration and the Obama administration. And they weren't doing it to this extent, you know? So it's like, this was a choice. And so I said, the law is not forcing you to do this, you shameless liar. That's all he said. And a friend of mine in podcasting saw that and said that he's like disappointed in me for not understanding the law and blah, 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 blah. And we went back and forth all day long. We still completely disagree on this because now through this conversation, I do know more than I did this morning. And I was wrong on one thing and I told him I was wrong because it's not even interested, but I was wrong on something, but he's been wrong on stuff too. But I maintain the fact that like, this is a choice. Prosecuting every single one of these people in the criminal proceedings and making them all go to jail, that's a choice. And so what happened today is that Trump signed this executive order that I haven't been able to read yet, but apparently it's going to allow the children and the parents to be housed together, but indefinitely. So there's so many things that are wrong with that. First of all, it's illegal to detain people indefinitely, or at least it should be or used to be. And then in the Obama administration, they were trying to house families together, and there was a court case that said you can't, which is kind of how we ended up here to begin with. Because the idea was you don't want to have kids in the same jail as adults where they could be, you know, diddled by perverts. So it's a huge mess.
Yeah,
and so he basically said he's going to do something that's illegal.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the mess is if you're going to prosecute everybody coming across the border, then that's where the problem comes in. Because, I mean, there's no way to do that efficiently if there's going to be kids and adults.
I mean, there might be. So the only thing that I can really come up with is if you have these detention facilities, split them in half. Kids on this side, adults on this side, they're still in the same building. They can still have visitation in rooms or whatever. So I feel like there's ways we could work this out. There's also ways, if this is actually something we want to do, like taking my own feelings out of it, but let's say we actually want to prosecute every single one of these people as criminals, you could hire more people ahead of time, knowing that there's going to be an influx.
So it goes quickly.
Yeah, you could prepare at all, which of course the Trump administration didn't do. So that's why it's so chaotic too. You've just put so much more work upon the people in the system. And I checked today, they got about $500 million more in funding, but that's nothing really when you talk about how much money they need to do stuff like this. So they have a little bit more money this year, but not enough for the massive change in number of prosecutions that they have to deal with. There's also the fact that there's two different agencies in charge of this. The Department of Homeland Security takes the kids, and then it's the Department of Health and Human Services that's supposed to house them, and they have no way of tracking them in between. Like, what the hell? So I've been upset by that, and I've just been upset by the people that have been responding in ways that, like I had one old lady, because I've talked to her for a long time, I muted her again, but she's too much. She just said, like, these are Latins that are being sent here.
Oh, wow.
It's like a conspiracy. Like, it was so racist that I was just like, I can't.
Yeah, they're not sending their best.
Yeah, right. They're murderers and they're rapists. It's like, they're also 4-year-olds, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I just feel like if there is a plan, there should be a plan for the immigration, and there should be a plan for if people are coming illegally, what are we going to do with them? Indefinitely. I mean, to even say that means that you absolutely have no plan. Like, well, we'll figure it out when we figure it out.
Yeah.
And that seems like it'd be more expensive than
right?
anything else. Yeah.
It's going to be so expensive to house these people because we have to house them, we have to clothe them, we have to feed them. And for what? Because they want to be here? Like, that's the saddest part for me, because I think of these people coming and it's, how about we just give them some kind of permit to be here so that at least they're paying taxes into the system? You know, I don't understand the idea of like, you all have to leave. So I don't know. I don't understand the whole beef with people coming from other countries. I mean, really, when you think what a border is, it's an imaginary line. I understand having the imaginary lines because we collectively as a society are saying, okay, we're paying taxes for this infrastructure. We're doing this together. So if you're going to use it, you should pay into it. That's as much as I understand about why this is necessary. But if you're on one side of the imaginary line in San Diego and the other side in Tijuana, nothing really changes there. Like, it's so weird that we say just because you were born over here, you can't come here and you wouldn't be beneficial to us as a group, as a society. It's beyond me. I don't understand it. I know so many dumb Americans that I would like to ship off because they really aren't contributing to us. You know, I don't get it.
I get that point too, because I feel like I would want to be able to live wherever I want as well. Like, if I wanted to move somewhere and live, I would like it to be easy to get there and just live there without going through a bunch of hassles.
Totally.
Especially, do you know the number of people that are crossing illegally?
Actually, I do. I looked it up today.
What's the number?
Last month, it was about 50,000, which was higher than I thought.
That's a lot.
But when you look at it by year, from 2016 to 2017, it went down. And then this year started out pretty low. And then for some reason in the last 3 months, it's spiked up to 50,000 per month. But I also don't know if that's just them catching more people, because how do you count them if you don't catch them? So maybe that's a part of this new enforcement thing. I don't really know, but there has been a spike, but nothing, these numbers aren't out of the ordinary. So we're looking at about 50,000, which is high. It really is, which just tells me we need a better process for dealing with that. If that many people aren't able to just show up and be like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Like, why do they have to go through the desert? I don't really get it. Our whole immigration system I don't get. So that's a problem too.
I don't understand it either. It should be go to the DMV and sign in, say I want to live here now, and
take whatever tax.
Go get a job.
Pay your taxes. Hi. Like, I don't have a problem with that. But that's why I feel like so much of this is based in racism. You know, that this is being pushed forward right now as if it's the most important thing we have going on in this country. And I just don't see it that way.
I do think there's something to be said for enforcing the law and creating a deterrent to just coming over illegally. But on the flip side of that coin, there has to be an efficient legal process for that to make sense.
So I tried to live in Europe in 2008.
Okay.
Joe and I sold everything we owned and we moved to Europe. And 3 months in, this was 2008, so it was the end of the Bush years. The visa used to be a year. And between the 2003, when I went there the first time, and 2008, there were so many Americans. They were like, screw y'all. You can only come to Europe for 3 months and then you have to go. So with a week left, we had a couple choices. One of them was we could travel to either Russia or Africa. Those are the two closest places where we could do the thing where we like leave and come back. It was crazy. So that was one option. We could leave for 3 months and come back to do it legally, or we could just stay and just like be under the table, hope we don't get caught, you know, that type of thing. The deterrent for me was that if I did get caught, I would basically be banned from the European Union. And it was like, I want to come back here. This is the place I want to be. And so what we decided to do is we decided to come back to the States for a while. We went to Hawaii. It was supposed to be for 3 months. We stayed for 3 years because it's Hawaii. But that was enough of a deterrent for me. And I really wanted to live there. I wanted to stay there for a while. I wanted to get a job. I found out that it was tough to do with no money because we only had $7,000 between the two of us. So we couldn't afford to buy our way in, which is a way that people do it. And so we left. And so when I think about the deterrent as someone who did try to move away, just the idea that I was going to be on some like no-no list, that was enough. You don't necessarily have to take away people's kids to make them not want to take that risk. But at the same time, in the European Union, I was able to read and figure out what the immigration system was. And for us, I mean, I do this for a living and I still can't tell you how it works. So, and I don't even want to look into it because I'm so afraid of it. I have a friend that came here from Bolivia and she married into citizenship. So that definitely helped. But navigating that, I mean, even just the stories she told me were so confusing and it was such a nightmare and it took her years and years and years and she married into it. It shouldn't be that hard for her. So yeah, when I think of deterrent, it doesn't have to be this extreme.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's an executive order now. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah. And like I said, I don't know what it says. And I was actually, one of the reasons that I burned this entire day is that I was so upset by this before the executive order. I mean, I don't know what it's actually going to do. Because like I said, from what I understand before you got here, it's creating a system that was illegal under Obama. So it's like, I don't think this is a solution. I think it's weird. I don't know where this is going. But I was thinking about doing a episode instead of the one I have planned because I haven't recorded the main show yet. And so I've done a whole bunch of research. I think the next episode is going to be about this because obviously it's making me nuts. But I spent an entire day almost about to throw my episode out the window and do a whole new one. And it's been a nutty day.
That would be an interesting episode. I mean, especially since the ball really is in Congress's court. If they're going to create some sort of immigration reform. I don't know if they're capable, but...
Well, so that's the other factor. They're voting on 2 immigration bills, big ones, tomorrow. Where did these come from? Nobody knows. So it's like, that's crazy too. They're just, all of it's happening so quickly, which I think is a strategy. Yeah. I think this is all strategy like, hey, we're separating the kids, so let's push through this stuff because it's going to make it better. And they don't give us time to read it. I mean, they do this to me all the time. And I've been telling people that this spring in particular, like the first year of Trump was kind of just emotional because I'm American. We've all been feeling that what is happening to us feeling. But this year has been really hard for me because I feel like a lot of people have stopped paying close attention because it's so all encompassing and we're tired of it. And yet for me, paying attention to Congress, there's been a fire hose of legislation becoming law. And I don't feel like that is matching what anybody is talking about. So I feel like an alien again, where I'm paying attention to stuff that people aren't. So tomorrow is a very big day. There are these 2 bills. I can't tell you what's in them. I don't even think the Republicans can really tell you what's in them. And they're going to be passed or not by the end of the day tomorrow. This is nuts, you know? So that's what I'm kind of waiting on. Are you going
to read the bills?
Yeah. And so what I was going to try and do, because I have to release, we're recording this on Wednesday. I have to have this done by Friday night. So in order to read those bills, which again, they might even change tomorrow, I need more time. I can't do this at the same time because I've seen this happen before. Well, they'll change it during the vote or like, I don't know what's going to happen. So I just can't, I'm not ready to talk about this the way I want to, you know what I mean? So I'm going to stick with my topic, even though it feels weird to be feeling like this right now and have this be really dominating my last 2 days and then be like, so let me tell you about Venezuela. I'm going to have to find a way to get back into it tomorrow and record this thing. But I'm thinking DHS just because this is an interesting thing. I think that should be the next episode.
I think you should, because like you said, there's not a lot of information on what's going on. I mean, everything is about Trump and North Korea or Trump and Stormy Daniels or...
And we are getting a lot of stories about the detention centers, but I don't feel like we're getting a lot of information about how this is being implemented and what they're saying and
that's
why.
Why I asked you. That's why I asked you, like, do you think those stories are true? Because you get the stories, but I feel like a lot of it is like sensationalism.
And Venezuela is a good example of that because a lot of the stories coming out of Venezuela, I do not think are true. Yeah. So it's like, I do kind of have to look at what's being said in the halls of Congress, trying to figure out what the goal is and match that to like, do I believe what I'm being told? But in this particular instance, I do. Because when I watched Kirstjen Nielsen the policies that she's saying they're enacting are matching and are making sense with what we're hearing about where these kids are. And now I really wasn't paying much attention to it until we started seeing the pictures and until like Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, he went to these detention facilities. They first of all wouldn't let him in. He's a United States senator, so that's a problem. And then when they finally got in with some video cameras, I mean, they're giant pens with these, you know, like those mattresses that are only like this thick, maybe like a couple inches. They're sleeping on those on the ground with blankets that look like tinfoil. Like, this is not.
Yeah, it's an issue. If you can't let people see what you got going on, that's totally an issue.
It's a problem. And so I think the pictures are telling a lot of stories, and I do believe that it's happening. But what I found today, and why I also want to wait to do this when I have enough time to listen to them, is in addition to that hearing with the DHS secretary, which was on C-SPAN, I found 2 more hearings that were not on C-SPAN with Border Patrol officials, where they talked specifically about this and since the policy was implemented. And I want to watch those because that's like the ones that aren't on C-SPAN that you can't just see on TV. That's where the real talk happens. So even though there's changes happening with the executive order and I do think it's important to at least document, like, this is what happened. This is what they're trying to do. And this executive order is obviously a reaction to our reaction. So even though I feel like the story's not done yet, just to say like, okay, so from the beginning of April when this policy changed to now, this is what's up. And then what's going to unfold is going to unfold. But I also, there's some part of me that's like, the story's not done yet. Like, can I really do this episode yet? I don't really know. I don't know what to do.
I'm curious about the two bills they got going.
Me too. And with the repeal and replace stuff, I did read bills that didn't pass just to be like, these are the goals. I am curious about these 2 immigration bills. I want to know what's in them.
Because do you feel like there is a pressure on Congress because of these stories to do something?
Yes, I do. I just don't know if that pressure is being manufactured or if it's real. Like, for instance, I don't know if they're doing this policy in order to make us mad, which in turn allows Congress to move bills forth really, really fast with the support of people that don't know any better. Because that's kind of like, so every time that they fund the government and it's like, we're going to have a shutdown.
Yeah.
The fact that we're calling and being like, don't shut down the government is how they get these bills pushed through so quickly that are so big, that have so many things in them that have nothing to do with funding the government. That's the strategy. They want an outrage that people are responding to so that they can say, okay, we passed the bill. And a lot of people in this country, in fact, the majority of them, just go, whew, thank God they did something without actually checking what the something is.
I think a lot of people did that today with the executive order.
Yeah.
Like, thank God they saved it. There'll be no more breakups.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's 2,300 children that are already scattered around the country and we're not sure, like, they're having trouble matching them because they didn't I'm concerned about those 2,300 children. I'm concerned about the whole thing. Like, there's such a long list and there's so many unknowns. And I think that's one of the big problems of starting a policy before you've prepared anyone for it, because there's apparently 8 Border Patrol segments on the southern border. And the Border Patrol agents that are in charge of those divisions are the ones that are making a lot of these decisions. So they're leaving a lot of the guidance and the how are we going to do this up to the people who don't make the policy. They're just in charge of being like, all right, make this person go here and this person go here. Like, they're not being given that piece of paper that says, if this, then this. And that's supposed to come from above, and it's not. So that's why, I feel this is all incomplete. But I want to watch those hearings. I want to read those bills. And I feel like I'll need 2 weeks to do 2 bills, 3 hearings.
Yeah, it'll be a while.
That's a lot. So I just can't get it done in the next 48 hours. So
what's up in Venezuela?
Oh, Jesus Christ. We're trying to overthrow the government still.
Okay.
Since 2002, we've been trying to overthrow the government. But I watched a hearing while I was preparing for Dom's wedding, where it was like, this was a couple months ago. And that hearing, they were outlining certain steps that they want to take towards getting that government to change. And now I'm watching those steps happen. So that's kind of what I've been fascinated by, is kind of connecting those dots. And I talked about it in the last episode, but I just kind of want to put them in one isolated episode so that as this story continues, I can go like, okay, the Venezuela episode is where you get your backstory on this. Because if I say to go back to the State Department episode, I don't even think I talked about Venezuela for the first hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's not a good one. So I kind of want to just wrap it up in a little bow, what I know so far, and go from there. That's what I did with Ukraine and Syria and Libya, where I have isolated episodes where I'm like, okay, this is the story as I know it from now. And like with Syria, I've done it multiple times. So as this stuff continues, to even help myself remember what the story is, I'll do it over and over again, just kind of adding as more stuff happens. And so this is kind of going to be my first one with Venezuela, just to be like, all right, this is what I understand as of right now.
Yeah.
And I'll edit it as I go.
Yeah, overthrowing governments is tough. That's tough business.
Yes, it is. And I wish we'd stop it.
I do too.
It's so weird. But this one's really blatant, and I can name the people that are doing it. Marco Rubio, Bob Menendez.
Okay.
Like, they're doing it. And they've been doing it for years. In fact, here's a funny fact about sanctions. You know how we keep sanctioning all these people from all over the world, like cutting off their businesses and saying, like, you can't come to the United States? Well, Venezuela has sanctioned Senator Bob Menendez. Like, he's not allowed in the country. So I don't know why it didn't occur to me that it goes both ways.
Yeah.
But apparently it does. So we have senators that are sanctioned by other countries. Like, we're just never told that side. You know?
You won't get that. But it makes sense.
It does. I just feel like such a dum-dum for not even thinking that that's possible. Like, why was it such a shock to me when I heard it? I don't know. I don't think that I'm dumb, but I just feel like we're done a disservice in this country. We don't know so much. It's probably on purpose.
I think it's on purpose, but it's also just a matter of how information is disseminated.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna get a biased perspective just because of where you live.
Well, there's no such thing as a non-biased perspective. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing my best to at least back everything up with facts, but I'm not going to pretend that I don't have views on this and that my own experiences don't shape what I think. Like, even in this conversation, the fact that I tried to immigrate to Europe and failed, that shapes my view on what happens, you know? So it's like, you can't expect anyone to be unbiased because your experiences shape everything you think about every topic.
Yeah.
So what I think we're missing is perspective. And I think we're missing backstory. There's a lot of times, like even in this situation we're going through right now, we're being told there's kids in cages, but we're not being told about the laws that came to this. Like, if you look for it, you can find it, but we're not being told that this really started in the George W. Bush administration with the 2008 law. If you really want to start the timeline, that's a good place to start it, not with Trump, you know? And like, one of the reasons why kids were separated was because of this whole judicial process that went forward in the Obama administration. So it's like it's a bigger story than we're being told. And it's just so much backstory I don't feel like we're getting. Like with Venezuela, I'm just seeing like, people don't have toilet paper. But then I know someone who went to Venezuela and she's like, but they have napkins and like paper towels. Yeah. So and there's food in the grocery stores. In some parts of town, there aren't. But then you go down the street and there is some. So there's weird stuff going on and we're not being told everything. And I think that's on purpose. And that's what I'm concerned about when you just look at the media landscape and that there's 6 companies that control damn near all of it. You know, that's why stories like, even if I was working for the local news station, they're probably owned by Sinclair and they're not going to let me tell you about Venezuela because they have a list that we all have to talk about tonight. Okay. You know, and we've proven this on the internet. You just have to watch that thing where you can watch them in markets all over the country saying the same thing word for word. So stuff like this, my podcast only can exist by being 100% independent, you know, and kind of doing it the hard way. And I'll never make millions like Rachel Maddow, but at the same time, they're not going to tell me what I can and cannot say, which, I mean, I guess is good, but it just feels kind of futile most of the time because most people are watching the tube, not me, you know, and I don't have all the answers either. I don't know anyone who does. We have too much information coming from too many different locations. It's just...
Well, I think to me, that's the good part. Well, not the 6 markets are the 6 media companies that control everything, but the fact that you can't get information from Venezuela about, the senator being sanctioned.
Yeah.
And there's people doing podcasts and there's people on social media. It kind of does add perspective that you may not have elsewise got.
And this business model is working and changing things, I think. I think I'm at the forefront of something that's going to be good in media, because like The Intercept is a good example of they're doing really good investigative journalism and they're reader supported. So they don't cut it off either. So that's the thing, like the Wall Street Journal, if you really want to know what the corporations are up to, you need a subscription to that thing, or even better, Financial Times. It's hundreds of dollars. It's so expensive. So if I wanted to have access...
behind the paywall?
Yep. And they make them really expensive. So if I were to read the things that the CEOs and the congressmen are reading, like that's what I really should be doing. But Financial Times, first of all, it's written in code, a lot of that stuff. And it's so hard for me to read. But if I want to have access to it, I don't know if I have the budget for that. And then to have access to all of them. So the one I'm trying to afford right now is Wall Street Journal, just because that's what the business titans read and write in. But that's a problem too. So they're sharing information that only people with money or corporate ties can get. And we're struggling to get information everywhere else, where there's places like The Intercept and now podcasts and this whole Patreon universe that are people that are just like, okay, I'm going to do the best I can. And you just pay me whatever you think is fair. And because it's working for us, I think that will inspire others, because The Intercept has now been up for a few years. They're not going anywhere. And I know that they've hired people.
So The Intercept is totally free?
Yeah. And they have a really good podcast now. It's called Intercepted. Jeremy Scahill is the host. He wrote Blackwater. It's really good. And they're doing it the same way. They're not allowing corporate control of it. And so if they can make it work, and if I can make this work, I think we'll get some copycats in the next generation. My audience is young, man.
Yeah.
I have high schoolers, college people. Like, this is a young audience. It's awesome. So there's hope.
There's definitely hope. And I do think there will be more podcasters with that business model.
I hope so.
Just because it makes sense, because you could unpack the ideas as much as you want, spend as much time on it as you want, talk about whatever you want. And the way that you get it as a consumer is way better than having to sit there and watch a show, then watch some commercials.
Yeah.
And, it's just on your own time. You could go and really go through the story, which I enjoy.
I do too. I hate ads more than anything.
Yeah, ads are awful. Ads are awful. Yeah. But if you really want to put in some work and spend some time, you could go to the library and read Financial Times and Wall Street Journal.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Most libraries have those subscriptions.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. Alameda has 5 libraries. It's actually not too hard for me to do. I didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure at least one of them will have all the subscriptions.
Well, there's a podcaster that I'm friends with that works in one of the Alameda libraries. So I can actually find that out. In fact, Drew, if you're listening, can I get Financial Times at your library? Send me an email. But yeah, that would be really helpful. Although I do most of my research, I do just on my bed.
Online. The problem is, you have to get up and go to the library.
Get off my ass, yeah. And I don't enjoy doing that.
And you have to read the actual paper.
I have to put on clothes. I like sweats. Although I guess library, I can go in sweats. It's fine.
You could definitely go in sweats.
Yeah, I can be a garbage person. They'll just know me as a garbage person. It's fine. You're just going to know that I smell and I wear sweats all the time. It's okay. Our kickball team knows that. So they still hang out with me. But let's see, back to Jennifer's note. She said, I love that you ask what you can do about all this and how things can be changed. I certainly don't have an answer currently, but you continue to shine a light on Congress's activities is definitely the right thing to do. Your listeners are thinking the same questions and working to figure things out as well. Is there a way you could engage your audience to help generate ideas for action? You're educating us. Wouldn't it be powerful to harness that education for action? I mean, it would, but right now, we're hovering around 10,000 downloads per episode. There's 300 million people in this country, and those 10,000 are from all over the world. So what action can we fucking do?
That's what I was going to say. What action? The 10,000 could do an action for sure.
It's something, but I guess I'm not much of a joiner. You know, like I want to do stuff individually, which is kind of why I'm doing Congressional Dish. I'm not in a network. I'm not trying to have co-hosts. Like I like to do things on my own. And I think a lot of people are like that. So when I think of actions we can do, a lot of times it boils down to write your congressman, call your congressman. I mean, that one basic step is one that so many of us are not taking. So
okay, but
it's not satisfying, but it works.
Do the Congress, our senators actually read those emails?
Yeah, they do. And you know who told me this? Jack Abramoff, of all people. Isn't that nuts? First of all, got to meet Jack Abramoff. But I said, does calling and emailing actually make a difference when you reach out to your own representatives?
It does. It does very much, by the way. And they accord in congressional offices for every call they get, they'll accord it as if it's 10 or 20 calls, meaning that they know that there are a lot of people who aren't going to call them. And similarly with letters.
Yeah, it just feels so fake. And then when you see when you see people coming and they're holding these town halls, and it's like it never comes across to me like they're really listening.
They are. Those are the only people they're listening to. They can't listen to the people that don't show up and speak. And so that's why it feels like I've been to these town halls, especially in Walnut Creek. I went to a couple, and it's all old people. All the heads are gray. And it's like, so you wonder why it seems like our grandparents are controlling the country. It's because they're the ones showing up. We're not.
Well, that's what I was going to say. As far as action, to me, that would be the most effective, is just getting as many people as you can to actually vote.
Yeah. 100%.
I think that would be super effective.
Especially in the younger generations, because we're not voting.
Those are the ones not voting, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess maybe that's the education we harness. So it's just like vote and vote smart.
Just
vote
in the what do you call it? The
next
midterms?
one's the midterm.
Yeah,
well, and there's still some primaries left. So California's is done, but there's still some primaries left. I don't know where, but the primaries, those are even better because even fewer people vote. So when you show up there, you get to narrow down the candidates that are on the ballots. I think that's super important. So it's like, think of 2016. When you showed up just for the general election, your choice for president was Hillary or Trump. Ugh. But the people that showed up to the primaries, they were the ones involved in picking Hillary and Trump. So if we had all been voting there, we might have had different options.
Exactly.
All the people that were just like, oh, Hillary's inevitable, that didn't show up to vote for Bernie, well, you made it happen that Bernie couldn't possibly win because he needed those votes. So it's like sitting out helps nothing. And I think actually voting in the earlier elections in some ways is more important, because when you narrow it down to 2 garbage people, then you're getting garbage. Back to the note. She said, one suggestion I'd like to add, be mindful of how your expressed passion might affect new and current listeners. I get that the things you are exposing are jaw-dropping and make you really angry. Too much passion might negatively affect your credibility. This is people telling me to calm the f*** down again. Like, watch your tone, Jen. Like, I can't listen to this. Like, no, I am who I am. Like, Jen, just change your personality and people will like you more. It's like, really? Which people? Because some people really like my feistiness.
Yeah, I like it.
The people that don't aren't going to like me. Like, I can't change my personality. It's just not an option. Back to the note. It might be helpful to solicit opinions from others on this as well. I'm probably subconsciously concluding that if someone is very passionate about something, she has likely lost the ability to think objectively about the topic.
Yeah. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I don't either.
I feel like the passion is the only way that you could read through all this Congress stuff and actually do it.
Not lose my mind, yeah.
Because, there's no way I could do it.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that same passion for what you're doing.
And I believe in passion plus fact checking.
Yes.
So it's like, if you want to yell at me, like, you go right ahead. But like, okay, on Twitter today, I had a guy who was saying things and he was clearly passionate about it, but they were demonstrably false. Yeah. And so when I was like, give me links to whatever you're talking about. And I said, well, the link you just gave me proved that you're wrong. Like, that's where I get frustrated. If you're going to be passionate, especially at me, back it the fuck up. And like, I do that. I practice what I preach. So it's like, when I'm passionate about something, I'm at least going to watch the hearings and I'm going to read the bills and I'm going to know what the hell I'm talking about before I get on this microphone. And I feel like that is objectivity. But back to Jennifer, she said, thanks for your show and keep up the excellent work. You're very welcome. And thanks for supporting it. We also got a raise from Garrick Smalley, who lives in Berkeley. So
Nice.
I think we will meet him one of these days. And he gave me a raise from $666 an episode, which actually really,
666?
yeah, I liked that one. But I will take the raise to $8 an episode. So thank you, Garrick.
Right.
We're also now getting $5 an episode from Yusef Kabal, who said, "Hi, Jen. I started listening to your show a little over a month ago after hearing you on Tinfoil Hat and being impressed with your input." That was Sam Tripoli's podcast. It was so fun. "I'm not sure what did it. I think maybe you just have a very convincing tone of voice and explain things well. I've so far managed to go through about 10 episodes and hope to go through the rest as time permits." Oh, the old ones are bad. The first 2 years, when people start from the beginning, I'm like so embarrassed. But there's still good information back there. Back to the note, he says, "God only knows how you managed to shine so much light on all these ploys to turn our world into a machine for corporate cronies to impose their will on regular people. But I think your ability to put each one in context is your biggest strength. I particularly enjoyed the Puerto Rico episodes." Thank you. "I was going to contribute $1 per episode because I'm facing some pretty tough financial times since moving to California." We hear that.
Yes.
"But I think $5 is probably more fair. I was kind of surprised that there are only 250 patrons when other podcasts that probably put in less work have thousands more. So I thought it would be important to add to the number for visibility's sake." Oh, good idea. "I hope this helps your show develop and I hope your audience grows as a result. All the best." Yeah, thanks for that. And the thing is that this audience is still really small and I don't do any social media marketing at all. I really depend on the audience to share it, and they have. That's what's frustrating. The audience is small, but in the podcasting grand scheme of things, I'm in the top 5% in the world.
Yes.
So podcasting itself is small, and that's the struggle. But I get what he's saying. Like, there's a podcast, I'm not going to name it because what I'm about to say is mean, but I have seen this podcast now twice live, and I still don't know what the hell is going on. I can't figure it out. I don't know what they're saying. I can't decipher it. I just don't understand it. They have 90,000 contributors on Patreon. So it's like, I know that that's possible, but I don't know. I think I need the audience to share this more. I need to get on some bigger podcasts, which is starting. Meeting Sam Tripoli was helpful. His podcast is new, but he's rising, and like, we think the same about a lot of stuff. He definitely goes down the conspiracy route, but I think what he liked about me is I was like, okay, I'm going to tell you how your conspiracy is true. Let me tell you what I know. Like, so I had fun with him. I think I'll talk to him again, but I'm not a celebrity. I only know a few at this point, and they're ahead of the game. You know, they're ahead of the game.
I mean, I think it takes time. So, I mean, there has been growth to your podcast, obviously, right?
There has, but surprisingly not in the last 6 months.
Okay.
And so all that traveling that I did, and I've done some bigger podcasts, it's resulted in no growth at all, which is shocking to me. Because there was a weird thing that happened with the stats. It was just the way they were being calculated by the company that I pay to host the media. And this happened to everybody, but it went from, I thought my audience was around 20,000 downloads per episode to where it was really closer to like 8. And now I think I'm hovering just under 10. It's still like not sure, but when you kind of look at the graph, it's just flat. Yeah. And the money's been pretty flat. And so it's kind of surprising that in the beginning I would go on these bigger shows and get a spike, and now I'm not. And I don't really know what to do about that. And I don't really know how to grow the show. And I also don't want to put any time into it, to be honest, because
into growth.
Yeah, because just doing that takes me away from watching the hearings and making the good show. So it's like when I sit down and I'm like, should I spend today on Twitter, like engaging randoms, or should I watch these 3 hearings? I should be watching the hearings because that is what people are paying me for. So it's also like, how much time can I dedicate to this shit? You know, am I going to do Facebook and Instagram and Reddit and Twitter and watch the hearings and have a social life? Like, what was happening before is I had no social life. Yeah. A lot of people didn't see me for about a year. And I just don't want that to continue. So I feel like in the last 6 months, I've found a work-life balance. And I've made the effort to go on these other shows. But if that's not paying off, like, I don't really know what to do.
I mean, I think that sounds to me funner than social media marketing.
I know.
Just going on shows, talking to people.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I think it's one of those things that maybe it takes more than one time to get introduced to an audience. So like when I think of Tinfoil Hat, I know people are coming from that podcast because I'm hearing it in the emails. I'm not seeing the spike in my stats, but I'm seeing it from people telling me that's how they found it. So it's like, that helps too, to find out where people are coming from. And it happens so often where it's like, I heard you first on this. So that's why I want to continue that strategy. And I do love it. I love going on the Young Turks, and like tinfoil hat was so fun. And I love doing that. But this all goes back to like, is the show growing? Like, no, it's not. And you would think everyone's like, this Trump thing must be amazing for your show. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think it's so all consuming that no one is seeking out any additional information.
Yes. I think that's what it is.
So screw me. Oh, you're going to like this next patron.
Nice.
We are now getting $5 an episode from our best drunk buddy, Mike Glazer.
Nice.
Thank you, Michael. He was so embarrassed this weekend. I love it so much. Like, Alexis played it for everyone in the car, and you didn't get to hear it, so like, spoiler alert. But at the end of the episode, he starts yelling stuff about his penis. He's like,
What?
Yeah, he was like that drunk, and he's like, "Who wants to see my penis?" So like all weekend, if there was a lull in the conversation, someone just be like, "Who wants to see my penis?" He's not going to live this down.
Who was he talking to? It was just you two?
Just the microphone. Well, okay, so first of all, you see our setup here.
Yeah.
You have a microphone in front of your face. I have my little recorder here, which is a solid 2 feet away from you, probably.
Yeah.
He yelled it into the recorder that's on the table. And then at one point, he had flipped the microphone around, unplugged it, and was just yelling things. Like, he was not here mentally. Like, he was special that day, and it was a Wednesday, and there was no cause for it.
It happens.
It did. And when I talked to Alexis about it, she's like, he was probably just really nervous. And he confirmed. He was like, I was really nervous. Like, I was trying to loosen up, and he apologized. And I was like, honestly, it's fine. If it was that bad, I wouldn't have aired any of it, you know? So you're fine. But it was funny. And he was so embarrassed. So, yeah.
All right. Shout out to Mike.
Shout out to Mike, and thank you for supporting the show. You didn't ruin it, my friend. We're also now getting $5 an episode from Danielle Starr. Thank you, Danielle. We're getting $3 a month from David Riddick on PayPal. Thank you, David. And we're getting $1 an episode on Patreon from Joshua Zook. So thank you, Joshua. Oh, okay. I have to show you a movie.
A movie?
Yeah.
What's it about?
So Kevin Wren and his daughter left me a video message. They contribute $200 to the podcast on PayPal, and they left me a video message.
Okay.
The reason I'm hesitating is I don't have the computer linked up to this.
So nobody could hear it?
Well, I'm learning how to use this thing. It's only been 5 years. Okay, so here's the note. It says, "Hey, Jen, my daughter and I left you a video message. Please check it out." And then they invited me to hang out with them this weekend because she was coming into SFO and he's on his way to Bali, but I was going to Dom's wedding. But yeah, here's their video. This is the first video message I've ever gotten, and it made me so happy. So let's watch it.
Hey, Jen. My name's Rain.
I'm Kevin.
And we're father and daughter, and we love your podcast.
Lots.
A lot. I listen to it pretty much every day. In the car, it's always playing.
Every day because you're backtracking.
Yeah, because I'm backtracking.
We wish you did one every day.
That would be awesome. But we are
Yes.
new listeners, and we will be new contributors very soon. Your checks are in the mail almost.
I keep saying it. I'm just procrastinating, but it's coming to you.
I did write
assure
the
you.
checks. I wrote the checks.
I did see it.
They're coming.
She has checks pre-written every month for you.
Yes, for 6 months, and then hopefully I can contribute more.
Yeah.
But anyways, we love your podcast. We love the work you're doing. We really appreciate that someone's doing that work because not a lot of people would do that, and it's information that everyone really needs to know. So we appreciate the work you're doing, and we're excited to keep listening to your podcast and know more.
And I love that it's not conspiratorial because there's a lot of data out there that's just too much for people to grok because it is too out there and conspiratorially minded, which I love. I love that stuff, but I think most people just will discount it. And so you bring a practicality to the knowledge that's really necessary to, I think, disseminate to people to get us to the next kind of level of understanding with what really is going on under the hood. So I really appreciate it. I love that kind of content. It's not dry at all. I get excited. I see the 2 hours. I'm like, oh my God, it's 2 hours. And then I forget you do another hour of contributor support stuff. So, which is awesome.
Which surprises me because every time I look at an episode, I'm like, fuck me, it's 3 hours. I've gone too long. People are going to hate it. I'm always afraid it's too long. So I'm fascinated to hear that.
Well, that's what I was saying about the podcast in general. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
If you're going to go through a subject, if it's 2-3 hours, I mean, you take a week or whatever and you go through it.
Yeah. And I'm shocked that people listen to the thank you part, but they do. And people are paying to have it be even longer. I'm amazed by this. I am sick of myself halfway through every episode. So the fact that people want more, I'm flattered, but I'm shocked.
Yeah.
They're so good. And you're so funny.
I know. I laugh out loud to your podcast all the time. I literally crack up all the time.
Rain loves stand-up. She's a big fan of Eliza Schlesinger. I don't know if you know who that is. But we both love stand-up, and you're super funny.
And I loved your podcast where you talked about the Women's Rights March. I thought that was hilarious.
That was awesome.
And I remember you being like, I don't know if this is going to go over well, but
it didn't.
Great. I totally agree with you, and good job.
We're not conservative people, but after this last election, we're not liberal either. We're definitely, it's like both camps were very messy, and I guess, I don't know, I'm libertarian. I don't really know what the philosophy is so much, but we're just open, nice, sweet, spiritual people that
they're just people. I like it.
They're just people.
Yeah.
I hate those labels. That's why I won't bother. I'm nothing.
I can't stand political party. Like even libertarian and all that stuff. Like, I mean, why does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know it's not really possible, but if they could just forget the Democratic and Republican primaries and whatnot, just have everybody go up there and be like, I want to be president.
Yeah.
Just have them all go at the same time and then we just pick.
That would be so much better. Because right now we're letting private clubs narrow it down. Yeah. And when after all like the Bernie stuff happened, the Democratic Party went to court and they basically argued that they have the right to rig their primary. That was their argument in court because they're like, we're private.
I don't see why they don't.
I guess.
It's their primary.
But it's ours. If we're actually going to operate like we have a two-party system, then those two parties need to be democratic themselves. Or else we need to actually not have a two-party system and have a primary kind of like what you say, where it doesn't matter which party you're in. But they have so many favors in the system.
Yeah, my point would be is if we have these two parties and then they get to just nominate who they want and then we get to vote on it, I'm guessing their argument is you don't really get to vote on who we get to nominate, which, I mean, it seems kind of messed up, but
I agree.
You know.
Especially where like the big two are now controlling who has access to the debates. So it's like if you want to have closed primaries and pick amongst yourself, you should have no role whatsoever in deciding who's on those stages on the TV. It should be whoever qualifies with signatures, the end. But they do have control. The Commission on Presidential Debates is controlled by the Republican and Democratic parties, has been since the beginning. It was a coup, really. They took it over from the League of Women Voters, and that's why our debates are so crazy. And they have these artificial thresholds that people have to reach before they can get in. That's why Jill Stein of the Green Party and Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party were not allowed on the stage. So it's like we have to make a decision here. We're either going to let the parties control everything, in which case they are going to have to be forced to open up their processes, or they can keep their shit private, but they have no control over the big picture. Right now, we're letting them have both. So that's my concern.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But as for like political labels, they do me absolutely no good. So I get the question all the time, like, what are you? Are you liberal or conservative? And I'm like, I'm Jen. And it irritates people to no end that I say that, but I'm like, I'm not labeling myself so you can put me in some box and like assume that you know what I think about everything. I mean, you and I are very good exampals of that.
Yeah.
Where you really have to talk about us topic by topic to know what we think about stuff.
Not only that, but I also want to know what your definition for liberal and conservative is. Like if you ask me, are you conservative? What does that even mean? Like that means something different to every person.
Well, like the terms neoconservative and neoliberal are the same. It's the same people doing the same shit.
Exactly.
So what are we talking about? Or like the liberal world order is what they call the thing where we're regime changing all over the place. But like the one that changed my life was when we regime changed in Iraq, which was done by the conservatives. So it's like, what are these words?
Yeah. I mean, what's your definition? I might be. I don't know.
It
depends.
Yeah. So I just don't think that they're helpful. So I just say I'm a person. I'm an American. That's the one thing that's like, I actually have a passport, so it's like there's a legal document. Like I am actually an American. It can be proven. It's a thing that I am. I pay taxes into this damn system. So it's like I'm an American. So as far as a political label, that's as far as I'm willing to go. And I think that's all that really matters. And one of the frustrations I have, like the libertarians are a good example of this, is like when you do label yourself, a lot of people, in order to fit into their group, shape their opinions around what they're supposed to be. So, for example, there were a lot of people that were against the war. So they were stopped being Republicans, they became libertarians, and now they believe in the free market because libertarians believe in the free market, even though they don't know what the fuck it is. So it's like, I see that happen all the time where it's like, it takes 3 questions. And all of a sudden you realize that they actually don't think about the economics. They're not in it for that. They're in it for anti-war, legalize my drugs, stay out of my damn business. And the economic stuff, they just kind of adopted, And that's where I think we run into trouble with labels too, because it's like now you've picked this team.
Yeah.
And you're ignoring the ways in which you can actually agree with a lot of people with other labels and get stuff done. But you're fighting about stuff you don't even understand because your team is. I agree with you on
that. You might have joined this group for one reason, and now you're saying, okay, I'm part of this group, so you're taking on all the other opinions. But it doesn't make sense to me.
No,
I don't see why people are so into it. Like I don't get it. What's the point?
I think it's like a team thing. It's the same reason why I'm into the Patriots. I know that I play absolutely no role in their winning, but when they win the Super Bowl, I'm obnoxious about it as if I scored all the touchdowns. It's fun to root for a team. And so if you're not thinking of the real world implications of what government does, like I think there's a difference between politics and government. When people ask me what my show is about, I say it's about government. I don't say it's about politics, because politics to me is the fighting. It's the teams, it's the campaigns, it's that stuff. I'm into government. I want to know what the hell they're doing. But I think the politics thing and splitting into the teams is part of the fun for the people that are just in it to win it. It's like they root Republican or they root Democrat. And that's why you see so much hypocrisy too, where it's like George W. Bush was droning people. It's horrible. Obama does it. Well, it's fine. And now Trump's doing it. He's a monster. It's like you can't go back and forth like that. You have to be mad the whole time. But you're not, because you were on Team Blue, and vice versa. Yeah. So even this right now with Trump, we're so mad at these deportations, yet Obama set records. So, it just, I don't know.
And not control other people. And I don't know what political ideal that goes with, but you seem a little on the conservative side from what I understand, but...
Which kills me because ever since I started doing the Young Turks, people are like, well, I know you're a liberal. So like one of my best friends in podcasting here, people think I'm a conservative. It's so funny how people label me.
Well, maybe like...
I'm proud of it, actually, where it's all over the place.
Up against the Young Turks, you maybe look conservative.
I guess. I don't know. I think just the fact that I'll disagree with people, they're like, oh, well, then you're the opposite label, kind of. It's just nuts. I just love it.
That is so much true. If you do kind of disagree or have some nuance, if you're not just lockstep, then maybe you are conservative. Like, they'll be like, oh, well, she's conservative.
Yeah. Like, flips it.
It just is what it is. I think every subject, just has to be talked about.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Obviously not conservatively minded, so it's just cool that you can present the data in a way that's not bent towards any specific, side, left or right. And you seem really unbiased. I really like that as well. Yeah. So, we could go on all day. We love your podcast.
We love it.
We listen to it together. I'm so proud that my 23-year-old is into this kind of stuff. I didn't think so. I just was like, hey, maybe you'd like this. You'd like this girl. She's awesome. And she listened to it, and little did I know that she just got addicted.
Yeah, pretty
I
addicted
love
to
as
your
a dad.
podcast.
I think that's really cool. So anyway, thank you, and we will support you. We throw your podcast out to people all the time, but also we want to throw our dollars to you too, because I know that helps if you don't have a job. Yeah. If this is your job, you need that money. So anyway,
we're over in Nevada City, and hopefully we'll see you in Oakland sometime. We're at the Yuba River right now.
River. We'd love to. Here, I'll give you a shot of the river.
Yeah, it looks amazing.
Right?
Bali in a week and a half. But it would be awesome if there's any way we could stop through. I don't know if we could on Saturday. Stop through.
Yeah, so that's why they asked me to hang out. But yeah, they so this little city that they live in, when I call it a city, it's like 2 streets. And there's all these little bed and breakfasts. And I talked to the lady there, and there's a bunch of swimming holes. And like Dustin's from South Carolina, and he loves swimming holes. And so when I told him that, he's like, we should go back and go swimming hole. He loves swimming holes. And I don't even know what he means by swimming holes. So I kind of just want to experience like what that is. And so, yeah, I just told him next time we go up to Nevada City. And I asked Dustin, and I was like, will you go back and like, we'll meet these people? And he's like, yeah, sure. So I think we will meet them in real life. But how cool is that to see their faces?
That's really awesome.
Isn't it? And I feel like they're people we would be friends with.
Yeah, that was really cool.
And Rain's 23.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm talking about. Like the younger generation, they are paying attention to this stuff. And this segment gives me hope. Thank God.
I think so.
So back to the list. We also got $50 on PayPal from Scott Olson. Thank you, Scott. We also got an anonymous $50 from PayPal with a note that said, I appreciate your hard work and patience it takes to gather the information you provide. You are a national treasure. Well, thank you. I know, was that fun? Oh, so we got some Venmos from Chris Canfield. He's becoming one of my favorites. He's snarky. So Lauren says this was 3 different payments. They equaled $31.99. One was $25, one was $5, and one was $1.99. So message number 1. I think it goes, okay. Message number 1 goes with the $25. How dare you say you're not making a difference? I know I'm about 2 weeks behind, but I just heard you say that in the previous episode. I won't send you any more money if you continue to think that way. Your appearance on the Young Turks is very important. I am involved in the Wolfpack here in Ohio, both financially and volunteer. Awesome. You're right on track. You are starting to make a difference. You have evolved significantly in the last year, and now you are being heard. Not that you weren't being heard before, but it's getting bigger. Keep doing what you're doing. It's extremely needed. I make my children listen to it while we smoke weed, so it's working.
That's hilarious.
My people, man. Okay, so then this is message number 2, went with $5. Okay, I listened for 3 more minutes and heard you talking about me now. My great idea, you just shit all over it. Luckily, your husband hasn't so far, but I haven't listened to the rest. So this is kind of becoming funky. I want you to see this, so I have to pay you, but you just shit all over me. What the f does that make me? I know I'm only kidding. I would not be boring. I will tell you that. LOL, you already know that. It's all good. Here's $5 more. And then message number 3 went with $1.99. He said, okay, you ended strong. You came back around. I love this.
So funny.
Isn't it great?
Is this so? He was basically listening to your episode, just giving you money at different points. Like, oh, okay.
He likes to hear my reaction to the stuff he says.
Yeah.
So it's become a regular thing. He's contributed now on probably like 5 or 6 episodes. I don't know. But he said something. I remember it was him. I can't remember exactly what he says off the top of my head. But I definitely was like, oh no. Oh, that's what it was. He wants me to do the thank yous with contributors. And I didn't necessarily shit on the idea. I'm not saying no, but like kind of how I told you off air, I want to do this with friends right now because I don't know what I don't know about how this is going to work.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like I'm really testing it with people I know to see if you guys enjoy doing it, to see what I should do differently, what rules I have to, like, I don't know what I'm doing. So that's one factor. But then I'm sitting here now, we've been doing this for a long time, actually. I think we're going on like 2 hours, right?
Okay.
If I don't know you and I don't know your personality, what happens if you get someone who just sits there?
Yeah.
You know, like I don't know these people, so I don't know how to pull that off. So it's not that I shut down the idea, but I'm uncomfortable with it right now because I don't know. And right now I'm only comfortable doing it with friends. And even then, like only kind of.
Exactly. It makes sense because it's usually just you.
Yeah.
I know you had people when you were doing the election, when you had like the election episode.
Oh yeah. That was just fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was too many people. I learned some lessons, but that's what I'm saying. Like I wanted to experiment with a thing.
Yeah.
It was pretty much a failure. We had a lot of fun and I got like one good clip of when like I cried when Trump won, which is going to live in infamy. But for the most part, that did not work. And so it's just stuff like that. I'm still in the experimentation mode. Plus, what if I get something like that lady that was pissing me off on Twitter who was saying that these are Latins that the Catholics are trying to push on us? Like, what if that woman is sitting at the table and I don't see it coming? And now I have some crazy shit coming at me. Do I even want to engage in a conversation with like craziness.
Yeah.
So I have to protect myself because as much as I love so many of my listeners, some of them are insane.
Yeah, it's funny too. And you were talking about Joe Rogan. I was listening to him talk about like the evolution of his podcast. No, he was talking about why he got like a new studio or something.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I had to, first I was doing it at the house. And I started having people come over and I was like, I need a studio because I don't want these weirdos coming to my house.
Exactly.
And like, you're doing it at your place. So.
And that's why it's like, it can only be my friends right now. Because also like, look how unprofessional this is.
Yeah.
This couldn't be more janky if we tried. So I'm actually looking at, there's a WeWork in downtown Oakland that I'm looking at. And if I get one of their stupid little rooms, it's so uncomfortable. It's like being in a fishbowl, but I could keep my equipment in there, use it as a storage place, and then do this in the conference rooms. After 6 p.m., no one uses them, so it wouldn't be an extra charge, in which case it looks a little bit more professional. And if I am talking to someone I don't know, I can be like, bye.
Yeah.
We're here. I'm in my home. Like, thank God that you're friends with Joe, because when he rolled in hammered and went to bed, you didn't think anything of it. But a professional podcaster might, So it's like, I'm just not there yet. So Chris, I wasn't shitting on your idea. I'm just not comfortable with it yet. So there.
I like Chris though.
Oh yeah, he's so much fun. I love his notes. Let's see. Back to the list. We also got $25 on PayPal from Rudolph C. Grand Jr. And he said, his note said, fight the Death Star, which you'll understand if you listen to the other episodes. But yeah, the Death Star. We also got $25 on PayPal from Bradford Farrar. Thank you, Bradford. We got $20 on PayPal from Andrea Knapp. Thank you, Andrea. We got $10 on Venmo from Doug McMaster. And he said, this is for the Bank Lobbyist Act. I like Venmo. So easy. Great work. Thanks, Doug. I think Doug is my friend, actually. I have a friend named Doug who's a podcaster in Oakland, and I can't remember his last name, but it might be McMaster. So Doug, if that's you, hi friend. And if it's not, hi friend.
Yeah, Doug's a friend either way.
Yeah, either way. We also got $10 on PayPal from Dennis Marino, who said, Jen, I haven't donated in a while. I have no sob stories that I care to share, and I haven't binged on podcasts as I have in prior years lately. There are a few things I give money to after making me feel like golf swing outside of a red light district, but I had to throw some money your way after listening to the Bank Lobbyist Act and State of War episodes. Golf swing, golf swing, golf swing. Love you, Jen. Dennis. Thanks, Dennis. We got $10 from Robert Perez. This is a check. Robert Perez is from Santa Rosa, California. He's been contributing forever. Thank you, Robert. Nice. We also got $10 on Venmo from Paige Davison. Thank you, Paige. And she said it's the most helpful, interesting podcast. Thank you. It's a nice compliment. We also got $5 on Venmo from Michelle Molina. And Michelle, we can't tell because you are a check subscriber if this was a bonus. And we can't tell because Lauren didn't send us the checks. Wah, wah. But yeah, Michelle, thank you either way. And then we also got $5 on Venmo from Henry Watkins, who said, this is for the dish. Thanks.
Nice.
Yeah. And then we have 2 more notes. These are from subscribers. So if people that are contributing regularly have something to say, they just like email and I read it. So this is from Chris Reamer. He said, hi, Jen, your latest episode on the State Department was enlightening. I had not looked into NGOs, but you prompted me to get off my butt, or rather to sit down and get on the computer. It's the worst part of my job. Makes me so fat. I like never move. Here's an episode I found on the Corbett Report that added to my understanding of the scope of NGO influence on the world stage. I hope you too might find it useful. And you know what, Chris, I actually watched it this time because it went along with my Venezuela research. Have you ever heard of the Corbett Report?
No.
It was interesting. And the guy actually gives his sources. One of the things that kind of kept me away with it is that the way he titles his videos seems very like borderline Alex Jones.
Okay.
And just like the shock value of them. So I've kind of ignored it, but this was a really good video. And so if you guys want to see it, it's corbettreport.com/NGO, but I also put the link for you guys in this episode's show notes. So if you guys want to see it, but it was good. And I subscribed to the podcast. I think it's something worth checking out. I've had too many people tell me that I would like it. So yeah, I finally checked it out, guys.
What did he talk about?
Oh, so this was about non-governmental organizations. It goes with the last episode I did because I found out. So I read the funding bill for the State Department, And one of the things that blew my mind is that we have all these funds. I don't know what the hell they are. And they have all like happy democracy names. And so one of them was the National Endowment for Democracy. And when I looked into this creepy thing, I found out that it takes our tax money from the State Department, goes to the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a private organization, which then takes our money and hands it out to other private organizations. And just the rabbit hole of the organizations that it goes to, like, what would that work out to be? 1/4 of the money goes to organizations that are definitely run by the Republican and Democrat parties.
Oh,
so that's weird. So they get to divvy out about $20 million of our tax money each to wherever the hell they want to. The only rule is it can't be governments. So it's pretty shady. And then when I looked at the people involved, the chairman of the main fund, the one that hands out the money the first time, is Andy Card, who's George W. Bush's former chief of staff. The lady in charge of the Democrats' money funnel, basically, is Madeleine Albright. Like these are big names. Oh, and the Republican one is chaired by John McCain.
Really?
Who's a sitting senator. So it was like the weirdest thing. And the more I went down the rabbit hole and found out the people involved and explained who they were, it was just mind blowing. And that was only one of the funds. There's another one called the Democracy Fund, Democracy Fund. It just has red flags all over it.
Democracy Fund.
Yeah, that's never good news. USAID is something I need to look into more because apparently they've been involved in regime changes all over the place. So it's just like the State Department section. I'm still overwhelmed by how many things I didn't get to. And so that episode was like an hour and a half of the actual content part. And then that was the Drunk Glazer episode. And that one just blew my mind. So I definitely talked about non-governmental organizations. And it was really the first time I've ever looked at them. So that's why people are recognizing that my mind's a little blown by this.
But the corporate report, so this guy he does like investigations into certain stuff.
Yeah, so it was like 15 minutes or so, and it was kind of explaining the big picture. It named a few of them. Like in it, he talked about the National Endowment for Democracy for a minute, and he talked about USAID and just kind of, it was like a big picture look at the role that they play and how it's like they do some good work. And so that's how they get away with the shady stuff they do. Because if you look at USAID, they do provide disaster relief to people and they do good things. They also help overturn governments, and that's such a small piece of what they do, but it's a pretty fucking important piece, and that's the stuff it's covered by their good deeds. You know what I mean? But the National Endowment for Democracy, no. Yeah. That's just shady.
That's just money.
Yeah. That's just
giving away money.
Our tax money. And that's what's so crazy about it. When you look at their website, it looks like it's a private foundation that's giving out the money. It's our tax money that's going to all these places. And that's the disconnect. And then when you look at these two, the Republicans in particular, surprise, surprise, totally lied about their association with the party. But if you look into the history of when their organization was created, it was created with the National Endowment for Democracy at the same exact time. And it was a scandal for like 30 years in Congress because it was giving taxpayer money to the Republican Party and to the Democrat Party. But we've forgotten. And so on their website, it says it's nonpartisan. They just lie. Just straight lie. And I checked, which took way too long, but I'm glad that I checked because I looked. Every single person on the board of the directors is either a high-ranking official in the Republican Party or is a major donor to it. Same with the Democrats. Every single person. So that was a fun one.
There you have it.
Yep. That's the type of stuff that when I find it, I get so excited. Yeah. It's like, this is such a good story. And there's so much stuff about our government that's not even new. That's blowing me away. Like, that's why I constantly feel overwhelmed because here I am just looking at what the State Department is. This was not created by Trump. This was created 15 years before I was born. No, actually, the National Endowment for Democracy was created the year after I was born. It was 1983. So it's as old as I am, but it's new to me. And there's so much that's like that. Every time I turn around, there's a new place that we've regime changed or we're trying to. It's like, there's so much left to learn. I'm just overwhelmed all the time, but in a good way. At least it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I used to be in property management and I was dying inside. So I do like this better.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, you got a good job.
Yeah.
And like just hearing all your thank you notes, I mean, it definitely sounds like people are enjoying it.
They are. And this is why I keep doing it when I'm tired on days like this. Like, Doing the thank you segment. It helps.
Yeah.
It helps. And it helps too, that video, to help see people's faces like that. That's nice too. Oh, here's our last note.
All right.
This is from Brian Watson. This one is deserved. I heard you say M16 in episode 175. I assume you meant MI6. You're right. M16's a gun. I did say that. I was saying something along the lines of like the CIA and the M16 overthrew something or some shit. I don't know, but it was definitely not an M16. Back to Brian's note, he said, it seemed like autocorrect or a teleprompter mistake. Oh no, I wish it was. It was my brain. Oh, now everyone knows you are not a James Bond fan. That is true. Love the show, Brian. So, in fact, one of my listeners, because he was not the only person to pull that, to tell me this, someone on Twitter asked me if I've ever seen a James Bond filmed. And I said something like, yeah, I have. It was the one with Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo. And he's like, you mean the Thomas Crown affair? I'm like, yeah, that one. And he was like,
the Thomas Crown.
He's like, that's what Thomas Crown. And I was like, oh, then I guess I've never seen one. So I didn't even know that much. Quite stupid. But yeah, I think we're finally done. Do you have any other messages for the internet?
No, I enjoyed it. That was fun.
Was it fun?
Yeah.
All right, good. Would you do it again sometime?
I would do it again.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for doing it. This was really fun. I knew you'd be a fun guest.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. That was cool.
Yeah. And I also want to thank Daryl, Karen, Mike, and Carrie at Pro Podcast Solutions for editing all of this. Jessica Hershey at jessicahershey.com is our great VA. Brian at Only Child in Imaginations is doing all the artwork, and I swear I'll email you tomorrow when I know for sure what the episode's going to be. But I think I kind of talked it out with you, Pat. I think I'm going to do Venezuela this time and the immigration crap for the next episode. That seems to make more sense.
He's going to draw. What's the artwork?
He does all. So I have different pieces of art for every episode. So if you look on, like, I have an app for the Congressional Dish, like, you can access the show notes from it, everything. It's for Androids and iPhones.
That's
so when you
cool.
pull up the episode, every episode has a different piece of artwork. And Brian's been doing this for years. He's a volunteer. He just loves the show and he's just been so consistent. But his volunteer job is going to eventually become like a money-making job because we're going to do merchandise together. So yeah, so it all works out. He's the only person that's volunteered that has actually consistently done his job and has become a real part of my team.
Yeah.
All the other volunteers have just... bye. You know, like they've either gotten over it or never really meant it to begin with. But he's a very much part of my team. At this point, I don't know what I'd do without him. So thanks, Brian. I'd also like to thank Lauren. You don't suck. And I'd like to thank Joe and my dad for supporting me in all of this and forever. And my mom and Robin and my step siblings and my friends and everybody. So yeah, thank you. And
yeah, you do a great job. Keep it up.
Thank you. All right, let's end this. All right, bye.
Let's do it.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.